Chapter 1402. That's not right. The Jade Phoenix Princess shook her head. There's no dust on the ground here, how could there be such a large amount of dust? Alaz was stunned, and Magadal's expression changed slightly. She squatted down and rubbed the ground with her hand, and then her thin eyebrows furrowed. Oh no, there's something wrong here. It must be that cunning goat Kentu. Alaz was already jumping up and down. Dragons and demons were mortal enemies, not to mention that she had suffered a lot at the hands of Kentu in Tikik. She was extremely prejudiced against the Lord of Purgatory. He must be nearby, and he attacked Magadal earlier. Huanghua did not answer, and just threw the thing in her hand to the ground. And this? Alaz and Magadal took a closer look, and found that Huanghua was holding the corpse of a strange creature. She threw the creature on the ground, and a pair of red wings appeared on the back of the skinny monster. This is a lesser demon. It really is a Kentu. The little female dragon's expression changed. Where are the others, and where is Delphian? Hundreds of millions of stars gathered together, hanging in the dark space, but a trace of the aura of death was reflected. Nearby, almost all the planets were shattered, and the light of the stars was dim. Occasionally, there would be broken asteroids floating in front of Brando, and the aura of time and space was no longer as vibrant. Even Flora and the others, or rather the dragons, could clearly feel that this once perfect kingdom was now beginning to decline. It was like the dusk of the gods. Although Brendel could already touch upon the true meaning of the power of existence, and the extreme planes that he created using the power of time and space could be said to be flawless, in fact, this level of kingdom was already beyond what he had seen in his previous life. At least, he had never seen any player or NPC that could depict such a pure law. Although the level of his power was still not high, and it was not even comparable to his own power level during the Silver Body era, his strength was incomparable. At the very least, Brando knew very well that if he were to fight his former self in his current state, he would most likely win. In other words, a Sage Domain player could defeat a Silver Body player just by relying on the law. If such news was spread in the past, it would definitely cause a commotion among the players. It meant that most players had taken an irreversible detour on this path. If that was the case, who knew how many people would have to delete their accounts and start all over again? However, no matter how pure and perfect the power was, there would always be a beginning and an end. After all, he was not a god and could only be regarded as a mortal. Perhaps he was one of the best among mortals, but he was still far from being omniscient and omnipotent. Therefore, when his power of law began to dry up, his kingdom inevitably began to waver. In fact, even if he had lasted until now, it was already enough to surprise him. This was actually a lot longer than he had expected. For a moment, Brando even suspected that Fu Luo and the others on the opposite side were not giving their all. However, the two giant dragon corpses floating not far away explained everything. No one would joke about their own life, even if their souls were enslaved by the Twilight Dragon. Soon, he understood where the problem was. Brando actually faintly felt that this world was containing his power. To be precise, he felt that this world was continuously transforming and transmitting dark magic to his body. When he raised his power to the peak, this transmission would become particularly obvious because the magic torrent in the void would suddenly increase. This feeling reminded him of the scene he saw at the elemental barrier. Without a doubt, this was the effect of Martha's law of Tiamat, but it was slightly different from that time. The law of Tiamat in Brando's memory was more gentle. It tended to change magic instead of enslaving magic. But here, Brando felt that the coercion was very obvious. It was an absolute order, majestic, solemn, and made people look up to it. Brando's breath was slightly uneven. At the same time, he looked regretfully at the two giant dragon corpses floating in the void not far away. It was a silver dragon and a black dragon. The corpses were full of holes. Brando knew very well that these dragons in front of him did not want to be enemies with him. If possible, he would try not to kill them. But obviously, there were not many choices left for him on the battlefield. He could not dominate this battlefield. The 9 giant dragons working together made him tired. If he held back a little, the corpses left here would not necessarily belong to anyone. But even so, he chose to avoid Flora as much as possible, or at least not cause fatal damage to her. Brando knew very well what Flora meant to Alaz. However, this was quickly noticed by the other side. Even among the dragons, Flora was considered a genius of the new generation. It was definitely not a coincidence that she could be the companion of a new generation of gold dragons like Alaz. But when this wisdom was displayed on his opponent, it gave Brando a headache. She had actively chosen to fight with her life on the line several times. He could see that even in the enslaved state, this dragon girl really did not want to die. It was purely because she saw through his weakness. But he could not ignore this weakness. For this reason, the dragon's line of defense was quickly stabilized. On the other hand, Brando himself became clumsy. The battle had reached the final juncture in a short period of time. Brando felt that his kingdom was on the verge of collapse, and the dragons on Flora's side were naturally aware of this. But except for a few people, there was still more anxiety than joy on their faces. This was not only because they had been delayed here for too long. In fact, at this time, Flora did not care much about winning or losing outside. What she was really worried about was her ally, at least in name, the demon known as the Lord of Inferno. Akenta had deceived them verbally from the beginning. Otherwise, they would not have fallen into such a bitter battle, and the demons obviously would not make meaningless deceptions. Even though they had always been chaotic and evil, they would not deliberately send their allies to the front line to die. The other side must be up to something. Flora had long smelled a strong conspiracy, but what made her anxious was that she still did not know which side this conspiracy was directed at. At this point in the battle, the outcome of this battle was actually not important to both sides. The dragon girl was the first to stop. She took a breath and looked at Brando with a somewhat strange gaze. Although she did not know why this ridiculously powerful young human would tolerate her, it was obvious that the other party did not seem to want to kill them as much as she thought. Maybe we can negotiate, she thought. She thought to herself, then said in a cold tone, "Human, stop." Brando naturally hoped for a chance to catch his breath. In fact, at this time, he also saw that the dragon's fighting spirit was fading. This made him click his tongue in wonder. The Twilight Dragon, or rather, Roman's method of enslaving these dragons was very strange. They could still maintain a large degree of independence of thought, except for the fact that their loyalty to the Twilight Dragon would not waver. So when Flora retreated, he stopped and said, "What's the matter?" "Human, although we each have our own master," Flora replied, "this battle is clearly a stalemate. I think your subordinates outside have already cleaned up the nether beasts, but you should be able to see that it's not possible for you to keep us here. If we do our best, I'm afraid it is possible to keep 1 or 2 of you." Brando did not want to show weakness. "Indeed, but all you can get is the corpse," the girl said coldly, as if she was explaining something that had nothing to do with her. "I can see that, although I don't know why, you don't want to kill him. Since that's the case, I suggest that we both take a step back. What good will it do for me to let you go?" Brando tried to stall for time, but the other party shamelessly used his weakness, which was a little sharp. He could not help but look at the dragon girl strangely. He did not seem to realize that she had such potential before. "You don't need me to tell you that Akentu is scheming against you in the dark. Although we are barely on the same side as that disgusting devil, it does not mean that we are willing to be its pawns. And now, I am extremely doubtful of its loyalty to its master. I believe that you will be happy to see internal strife between us. In that case, Miss Flora, why don't you?" Brando was interrupted by Flora coldly. "Human, I know what you are thinking, but I suggest that you don't have such thoughts. I have already stated my conditions. We do not like to bargain. You just need to make your stand clear. She paused. Either we fight, or we cooperate. We don't mind. Brando shut his mouth, but he was cursing in his heart. Don't the dragons love to bargain? Why did they lose their favorite hobby after joining the Twilight Dragon? But even so, he still nodded silently. He had to admit that although Flora's suggestion seemed a little ridiculous, every point hit the nail on the head, and he had to consider it. And after careful consideration, he was surprised to find that there were not many choices he could make. In fact, he was indeed very worried about the devil that had been hiding in the dark. The cunning sheep-headed devil was not a title for nothing. Chapter 1403. The moment they retreated to the extreme plain, Brando frowned. He originally thought that he would see a messy battlefield. Or at the very least, Phoenix Fire, Magadal, and the others had not yet defeated the Void Predators, but at least they should have the upper hand. However, the first thing he saw was an endless thin layer of fog. This fog pervaded the wilderness and hills far and near, and seemed somewhat out of place in this pitch-black world with crisscrossing lines of law. It was just that it was different from the chaotic fog they had seen in the Sea of Magic. The latter was majestic as if it was the power of a world, but the fog here was strange and quiet, as if there were unknown creatures lurking inside. This fog shrouded the front, as thin as a shroud floating on the water. When Brando looked into it, he immediately felt a slight dizziness, and the system also issued a timely warning. His willpower was far beyond that of ordinary people, but he was still affected by this fog. This showed how powerful this fog was. Brando immediately recognized that this was the mind fog, a very rare ability of demons. This gave him a bad premonition. The mind fog was actually a variant of dark magic, and most high-grade demons had such power. But they rarely did so. First, because it was unnecessary, and second, because to create such a large-scale fog, they needed to use the means of live sacrifice. Could it be that Akentu had brought the sheephead believers here too? He subconsciously looked up at Farofa and the others, but found that these dragons also had a cautious look on their faces. And at this time, Allah's voice came from behind, "Brando, how are things over there?" As soon as the little female dragon came out of the fog, she hurriedly said, "Brando, not good, Fang Chi is gone." But when she saw Farofa and the others not far away, her expression changed, and for a moment, she looked at her former companion with a complicated expression. Farofa also looked at her quietly, motionless, but there was no extra expression on her face. Fang Chi is missing. Brando was shocked. If Fang Chi disappeared, there were only two possibilities. Either he escaped during the chaos, or he was taken away. The former conjecture was not impossible. Fang Chi had always been different from them. Although he was a man of his words, in front of the mystery of the Jade, as the successor of the Ghost Chariot, it was inevitable that he would have ulterior motives. Although Brando never liked to be suspicious, he still asked cautiously, "Where's Miss Delphian?" "That woman. She's still here." The female dragon looked at Fuluofa and said, "What about the ship?" "I sent Mr. Liu and Huang Hua over, but there is still no news." "What happened?" "When we were fighting, a fog suddenly appeared. Many lesser demons appeared in the fog. Everyone hurriedly gathered and found that Fang Chi had already disappeared." Brando frowned. In fact, he had already made up his mind. He raised his head and looked at Fuluofa. The seemingly unfamiliar black-haired girl also shifted her gaze from Allah's and looked at him. Brando knew that the ship was stranded on the beach, and Fang Chi did not have the ability to get it back to the sea. He only asked for insurance purposes. And if Fang Chi left because of the Jade Heart, he would most likely take Delphian away. This should not take much effort for him at that time. But he did not do so, so the remaining possibilities were self-evident. And there were only two groups of people who could take Fang-Chi away. One of them was Fu Luofa and her people, and the other force was Akentu and his minions. Of course, the latter was more likely, but Brando still could not rule out the former. Besides, who knew if this was a trick by the other side? Although Brando did not think it was necessary. Fu Luofa's calm eyes were very persuasive. Although she did not speak, Brando still subconsciously cleared the suspicion of these few dragons. "Don't you have anything to say?" he asked. "If you don't believe us, there's no point in saying anything. If you believe us, there's no need for us to say anything," Fu Luofa replied simply. She paused and thought for a moment before asking, "I have a question. Who is Fang-Chi?" "He's our companion," Brando replied. At the same time, he observed Fu Luofa's expression as if he wanted to see if she was lying. But to his disappointment, the girl only had one expression from beginning to end. "I'm not interested in that. What I mean is, why did Akentu take him away? Are you so sure that it was Akentu who took him away?" Brando frowned and said, "How can I be sure that this is not deliberately misleading? I don't care what others think. This is just my judgment, and I don't need others to believe it," Fu Luofa replied, "because now I'm the one asking a question, not answering your question." Brando was silently stunned for a moment and could not help but look back at Alaz. He thought to himself, so Fu Luofa's usual personality was like this. It was hard to imagine that the little female dragon was willing to be with someone with such a personality. Alaz just stared blankly at her former companion, as if she had lost her soul. At this time, Brando saw one of the dragons behind Fu Luofa whispering something in her ear. The girl's face showed a rare look of shock and anger. "Fang-Chi is the 9 Phoenix with you." "What? Forgive me for not accompanying you." Fu Luofa and the other dragon seemed to have encountered something urgent, and they all turned around and left. Brando was stunned for a moment. He wanted to make them stay, but after thinking about it, he gave up the idea. The little female dragon opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but in the end, she could not make a sound. She could only watch the other party's back disappear into the fog. After a long while, she turned her head and said, "Brando, Fu, and them. It seems that they are not completely on the same side as Akentu. That demon has other intentions and included them in his calculations." Brando also looked in that direction and replied, "Then we go and gather everyone. Things may become a little troublesome." Brando furrowed his brows. He did not leave Fu Luofa behind because he had already guessed the possibility behind. In that case, there was no need to waste time on these dragons controlled by the Twilight Dragon. If they left earlier, they might be able to cause some trouble for Akentu. Brando had already guessed that Akentu's purpose was the stagnation realm. In fact, they had inferred this before going here. It was just that he did not expect that the Lord of Purgatory was so impatient that he personally took action before the seal was lifted. He had overestimated the importance of the Twilight Dragon to the stagnation realm, but he did not expect that he still underestimated it. The secret was so urgent that a high-grade demon lord would not hesitate to take a great risk to take action. It should be known that if all 3 of Akentu's clones unfortunately fell outside, the seal that maintained it would probably be extended for thousands of years. Everyone quickly gathered together. Even Huang Hua and Mr. Liu, who were sent by Alaz to check the stranded sailboat, were called back. Brando explained his inference, and everyone felt the seriousness of the situation. However, the others did not think too much about it. They just subconsciously thought that they could not let the Twilight Dragon get the Orb of Nature first. At that moment, no one said anything. The Prime Minister's daughter also began to re-infer the calculation process that was interrupted by the previous battle. It took less than a quarter of an hour to find the way to the stagnation realm again. They did not encounter any trouble along the way. Although it was obvious that Akentu had left many of his minions along the way, Fu Luofa and the others seem to have passed through here first. Most of Akenta's minions were turned into broken corpses by the angry dragons. The remaining few that escaped the net did not cause any trouble for Brando and the others. However, Brando felt a little puzzled along the way. Obviously, Fu Luofa and Akenta were very clear about the location of the stagnation realm. Along the way, whether it was Akenta's arrangement or the traces left by Fu Luofa and the others, they had never deviated from the scope of Delphine's calculation. This was not to say that Brando thought that only the Prime Minister's daughter in the world could crack the strange formula and calculate the location of the mystery of the emerald. What made him curious was that the sheephead cult knew this place like the back of their hand. From the layout of the cult in the sacred land of Atuk, they had obviously figured out the secrets inside and outside the moon's channel. Otherwise, Fu Luofa and the others would not be able to come in and out of this place so easily. But in this case, why did the sheephead cult never send people to the Nine Phoenix to find the descendants of the Jade Phoenix and the Phantom Chariot in the past few decades? Otherwise, they would have opened the stagnation realm long ago. How could he bring Huang Hua and Fang Qi to this place? Even if the descendants of the Jade Phoenix and the Phantom Chariot were more noble than the average person, they were often heavily guarded. But not every descendant of the Jade Phoenix and the Phantom Chariot were Huang Hua and Fang Qi. In fact, the existence of Huang Hua and Fang Qi in a huge family was in the minority. They could even be regarded as the core existence. But in the periphery, there were many descendants of the Jade Phoenix and the Phantom Chariot bloodline. Just like in Erewhon, core members of the royal family like Heroes, Griffin, the eldest prince, and Kiara were also considered the descendants of the royal bloodline. But there were also descendants of the royal bloodline like Amandina, Ling, and Lotus who were wandering outside, not to mention some branches of the family. Not everyone had a high status. Chapter 1404. For cultists like the Sheephead cult, it would not take much effort to kidnap such a person, and it would not attract too much attention. However, the Sheephead cult and their master, Akentu, the Lord of Purgatory, did not choose to do so, which inevitably made Brando feel suspicious. Brando did not speak, and most of the others seemed a little dull. Everyone seemed to have a lot on their minds, not only because they were worried that the demons would beat them to it, but also because they were worried about the safety of their companions. Although Fang Qi had always behaved differently from them, after getting along with each other for so many days, and even going through life and death together, even Huang Hua more or less recognized this genius of the Phantom Chariot lineage, but they did not say it out loud. However, Brando did not know that his doubts might seem ridiculous to Akentu. It was just a simple question. In fact, although the Sheephead cult had long calculated the secret of the channels of the moons, they had only just opened the door to the 10th channel, and their time was not much faster than Brando's. The reason was simply that they had not been able to find a suitable dragon willing to work with them before this. Fortunately, the awakening of the Twilight Dragon finally solved Akentu's problem. After opening the 10th channel, they understood that one of the conditions for solving the mystery of the emerald and going to the stagnation realm was to need the inheritor of the Nine Phoenix bloodline. At this time, the southern part of Madara was in chaos, and the route through the Sea of the Dead Moons to the Nine Phoenix had long been cut off. First, it was blocked by the army of the Crystal Cluster. At that time, the Sheephead cult could still barely go to the Taoist Strait. After all, although the Crystal Cluster did not acknowledge the demons, they were at least part of the Army of Chaos. However, after the Battle of Fenhodos, this road was occupied by the Lost Names. This time, the Sheephead cult completely lost the possibility of going south, so it was basically impossible to bring back an inheritor of the Nine Phoenix bloodline. Akenta had heard that there was a bloodline inheritor from the Jade Phoenix clan in Erewhon. He had been thinking of investigating this matter, but he did not expect that things would take a turn for the better. When Tao Chica met Brando and the others, he had actually suspected the identities of Fang Qi and Huang Hua. Demons were born in the abyss, and their dark magic power mixed with the negative emotions in the hearts of mortals, pain, despair, greed, and pride. Therefore, they were most sensitive to the inheritance of human hearts and blood. However, before it could put its suspicions into practice, its doppelganger had been sliced into two by Brando's heaven-shaking sword. Even now, it still had lingering fears when it recalled that sea-parting sword. Don't be fooled by its tough words. In fact, even if it wasn't sealed at its peak, it might not be able to easily withstand such a sword. Under such circumstances, how would it dare to find trouble with Brando? But what happened next made Akenta feel that the power of chaos was omnipresent. Brando and the others were heading towards the Green Sea and were discovered by its own subordinates. At that time, its mind began to spin those plots and tricks that it was accustomed to. Of course, all tricks needed to be matched with sufficient strength. Otherwise, it would only become a laughable joke. If it was any other time, it would definitely not dare to play any tricks in front of that terrifying young man. But it just so happened that there was another group of people sent by its supreme master. To be precise, it was Flora and her dragon companions. Akenta didn't like these self-righteous dragons, even though they had defected to the supreme master. But that didn't mean that he couldn't make use of them. In fact, it was precisely because of the existence of these dragons that his plan could be realized. As for the result of the plan, Akenta looked down at the young man in front of it. There was no doubt that it was Feng Qi. But at this time, this genius of the chariot lineage was in a strange state. He stood motionless in front of the Lord of Purgatory with a blank look in his eyes like a puppet. Akenta couldn't help but feel satisfied seeing him like this. In fact, it had already planted a seed of fear in Feng Qi's heart. That day in Tao Chica's temple, if it wasn't for Brando interrupting, it would have made this young man submit. Although it didn't do its best at that time, this seed wasn't completely useless. At least when it used those pitiful servants to carry out the living sacrifice ritual to create the mind fog, it didn't take much effort to make Feng Qi completely lose his consciousness. Otherwise, if the other party had reacted and the Titan had discovered its existence, even the dignified Purgatory Lord would not have been able to bear the consequences. But this is the power of a conspiracy. Akenta proudly praised itself. It was full of disdain towards Fu Luofa and Brando's group. So what if it's the sage domain? So what if it's a dragon? Aren't you just being played around by this lord's avatar? Ha, a bunch of fools. It looked at the puppet-like Feng Qi with satisfaction before slowly walking forward. This place was a basin in the depths of the hills. If Brando was here, he would definitely find the terrain very familiar. This was because the terrain was very similar to the Silver Elf's tomb in the depths of Chablis. It was where he first met the Silver Elf Princess Metasha. There was also the commander of the Phoenix Guards called Nalathar. He remembered that he had promised Nalathar that once he was free, he would go back and tell him what had happened in the outside world in the past 1,000 years. But ever since he settled down in Abes, he had been unable to do as he wished. In the past 3 years, he did not have any extra time. In this basin, the place where the Silver Elves' holy church was supposed to be was now a flat, empty land. Crisscrossing lines of law marked the location of this place among the crisscrossing hills. In the middle of the basin, a crystal ball floated in midair. The crystal ball was very similar to the floating sphere that Tada gave to Brendel, but it was obviously much bigger. This made it look more like a teleportation portal that was suspended in midair. It was a spherical teleportation portal. Inside the crystal ball was a vast and unfamiliar land. But it was different from the Wond that was seen from outside the elemental boundary. Wond was a continent that was full of vitality. The atmosphere emitted a fluorescent blue light that covered the vast ocean and land. The continent was covered with dark forests, mountains, and rivers intertwined. The surface runoff washed out the plains at the estuary. Civilizations gathered here and formed cities and settlements. Sailboats could be seen on the ocean. However, the world inside the crystal ball was a lifeless world. It was like a piece of metal covered in dark red rust. Its surface was bumpy and covered in ugly scars. Although there were mountains and valleys on it, the valleys had long dried up. Even the place where the ocean used to be was only left with a huge, shocking depression. On the entire continent, there was not a single trace of life. Not to mention green forests, there was not even a single grassland or tundra. It was as if there was only brown and red soil. Storms swept across the continent at thousands of miles per hour, sweeping away everything that could possibly exist. When Enchanting approached the crystal ball unsurprisingly released an invisible force. This force seemed gentle, but it made the Lord of Purgatory suffer considerable pain. Enchanting's face showed that he could not bear it. He could not help but curse viciously. But when he took another step forward, the whole valley where the crystal ball was located suddenly shone brightly. A huge magic circle appeared on the ground. In the light, Enchanting screamed, and half of his body almost disappeared. He hurriedly retreated with a look of lingering fear on his face. Compared to before he entered the valley, his body seemed a little illusory. This was because his body was originally just a projection. In fact, it was part of his power. But this power had obviously been damaged in the previous conflict. The terrible power of the crystal ball stopped Enchanting in his tracks. At the same time, he frowned. Now that he had the inheritor of the 9 Phoenix bloodline, he had fulfilled the requirement to open the stagnation realm. But the problem was, how should he use it? If it could, in fact, it did not care whether Feng Qi lived or died. So what if a demon sacrificed a human to achieve its goal? In its eyes, the royal family of the 9 Phoenixes were no different from ordinary people. They were just ordinary people like insects. But he only had one bargaining chip. If he accidentally killed him before he could open the gate, he would have to go back and find trouble with Brando. Because there was still one inheritor of the 9 Phoenix bloodline left. Of course, this was what Enchanting did not want to see. With his current power, he did not even want to face Fu Luofa and the others, let alone Brando. He looked back at Feng Qi. Previously, he had tried to bleed and sacrifice his soul. Of course, it was not complete. He also tried to harm himself, but he did not succeed. Did he really have to kill this person? Enchanting was a little hesitant because he only had one chance. If he failed, the result would be unbearable. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "You, come here." Chapter 1405. Seeing this damn demon speak, Feng Qi couldn't help but feel a sense of vigilance in his heart. But he didn't dare to be negligent. He could only pretend to be numb and walk over. Yes, in fact, Feng Qi wasn't enslaved by this demon at all from the beginning. Back then, Enchanting had implanted a trace of fear deep in his heart. But the swordsmanship of the 9 Phoenix lineage was very different from Won's power. If one had to say, it would be that the swordsman of the 9 Phoenix lineage paid more attention to the cultivation of the mind. Although the Phantom Chariot was a traitor of the 9 Phoenix lineage, it didn't mean that they had fallen spiritually. In fact, it was the opposite. The Ironheart and White Raven swordsmanship were more focused on the cultivation of the mind than the Desert Wind swordsmanship. Especially the former, it required the user to be as calm as water. And Feng Qi, as the leader of this lineage, of course, surpassed his master. He was oppressed by Enchanting back then because of the huge difference in strength. And when Enchanting's clone died, he immediately noticed the flaw in his mind. The people of the 9 Phoenix were also a member of this world. Naturally, he knew how terrifying the demons were. He didn't dare to hide the matter that day and told Brando and Delphine about it. Brando knew the tricks of the demons like the back of his hand. Although he couldn't do anything about the demon seed of courage, it was the masterpiece of a demon lord after all. And the domain of the mind had always been mysterious. Other than the mysterious psionic users in the north of Nazir, few people were proficient in mind magic, whether it was Wond or the 9 Phoenix. But Brando's solution was very simple and effective. He immediately let the little female dragon use magic to shield the seed of courage in Fang Chi's heart. After all, the seed of courage wasn't invincible. In fact, if it wasn't constantly protected by its master, it would soon disappear. But the demons would often appear in front of the victim shortly after planting the seed of fear. They would seize the power of the spell and completely make the victim submit and become enslaved. Generally, the demons would only plant the seed of courage on the more important servants. Brando didn't understand why Akenta would plant such a thing on Fang Chi. He could only think that it was Akenta's bad taste. But at that time, Akenta's doppelganger had already been killed by him, and presumably, he wouldn't appear in front of Fang Chi for a while. Adding to that, Fang Chi didn't take this matter to heart. But what Brendel and Fang Chi didn't expect was that their unintentional action would actually play a role at this time. When Akenta appeared in front of Fang Chi again, the latter could not help but rejoice in his heart, knowing that he had finally escaped a disaster. However, he had only managed to escape the fate of being enslaved. Akenta didn't realize that his seed of courage didn't work, but the difference in strength between the two was like heaven and earth. Fang Chi was smart enough to know that he couldn't resist. Otherwise, regardless of whether Magadol could react in time, his head would definitely fall to the ground first. He immediately pretended to be obsessed and obediently left with the Lord of Purgatory. He only hoped that Brando and the others could react quickly and come to save him. It was only at this moment that he wanted to see that damned Owen person, and his own cousin, more than ever. I hope Miss Delphian can analyze my situation quickly. Otherwise, I'll be in big trouble this time. Fang Chi's expression didn't change. He walked to Akenta's side like a puppet, but his mind was spinning with thoughts. Because the little female dragon's magic hadn't lost its effect, the Lord of Purgatory beside him didn't realize his true thoughts. Go to the crystal ball. Akenta coldly glanced at his servant and ordered at the same time. Fang Chi was stunned. He couldn't help but feel ecstatic. Of course, he knew what the crystal ball was. Didn't they come all the way here for the mystery of Emerald? And the answer to the mystery of Emerald was undoubtedly the door to the Stagnation Realm. Although he didn't know what the Stagnation Realm looked like, he could roughly guess what it was after seeing the scene in the crystal ball. Of course, he wasn't someone who would risk his life for a little benefit. He knew that under the surveillance of this demon, he wouldn't be able to play any tricks. But the scene he saw earlier gave him great hope. Obviously, that damn demon was extremely afraid of the crystal ball, and there was an invisible magic circle around the crystal ball that could stop it from moving forward. And this guy obviously wanted him to get close to the crystal ball. Fang Chi wasn't a fool. Brando had already told him that he and Huanghua were allowed to join this adventure team because the method to unlock the mystery of Emerald might use his and Huanghua's bloodline inheritance. How could he not understand that this damn demon should have the same idea now? This also meant that the risk of him getting close to the crystal ball was obviously much lower than that of this damn demon. His heart couldn't help but pound for a moment. If he could leave this damn demon and run into the crystal ball alone, wouldn't this demon be unable to do anything to him? More importantly, the crystal ball was related to the secret of the ultimate inheritance of the 9 Phoenix. Yes, he did promise Brendel and the others that he would share the secrets inside, but that was under the original plan. Now that he was controlled by this devil, he had no choice but to do so. If he could profit from this disaster and obtain the treasures in the Stagnation Realm first, then he couldn't be blamed for it. Although the descendants of the Ghost Chariot lineage valued trust, they weren't pedantic people who followed the rules. Otherwise, they wouldn't have betrayed the 9 Phoenix lineage. Fang Chi thought of this possibility and almost couldn't maintain his emotions on the surface. Even Akenta noticed his abnormality and couldn't help but look back at him doubtfully. This glance almost scared Fang Chi out of his wits. Fortunately, he managed to control the fear and greed in his heart at the last moment. At the same time, the demon seemed to be quite confident in its strength and didn't believe that it couldn't even suppress a mere mortal with the enlightenment of truth, so it didn't doubt it too much. Akenta's glance wasn't so much suspicion as it was urging Fang Chi's dissatisfaction with his hesitation. It didn't know that its servant wasn't afraid, but was absent-minded because he was too excited. Fang Chi took a deep breath and then pretended to be stiff as he walked into the stagnation realm. Although he was quite convinced by Brando and Delphine's inference, he couldn't help but feel nervous at this moment. Who knew if this strange magic circle and crystal ball really needed the blood of the 9 phoenix to open? What if it attacked him like it attacked the demon? Thinking about it, the cold-blooded demon lord wouldn't take pity on a mere mortal's life and let him stop midway. Maybe it had the intention of sacrificing him alive. Fang Chi didn't expect that his casual guess had almost guessed Akenta's thoughts, but at least he still kept a straight face and slowly approached the crystal ball. 50 feet, 40 feet, in fact, he had already passed the area where Akenta was first repelled by the crystal ball, but the crystal ball was still and didn't seem to show any signs of exerting the terrifying power from before. At this moment, Fang Chi couldn't help but feel excited, but he still understood that he was not completely out of danger. At least at this distance, the damn demon lord still dared to go deep. If he dared to run away, the other party would definitely drag him back like a dead duck before he could react. At that time, his life and death would no longer be in his control. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but tremble, but he still walked forward step by step calmly until he entered the position where Akenta had triggered the magic circle. And in the valley, it was still quiet at this moment. Seeing this scene, Akenta couldn't help but widen his eyes, and even his breathing became a little heavy. Fang Chi's breathing also became heavy, and the veins on his arms and forehead bulged. Of course, he knew that the opportunity was right in front of him, but the more it was at this moment, the more he couldn't afford to make a mistake. Unfortunately, some things were beyond human control, and one of them was the speed of his heartbeat and blood flow. Before this, although his emotions occasionally fluctuated, they were still within his control. Coupled with the little female dragon spell shielding him, Akenta was careless and did not notice it for a while. But at this moment, if Akenta still couldn't discover the abnormal movements of his strange servant, then he would be claiming the title of Demon Lord in vain, not to mention that his nickname was Cunning. In fact, the moment Fang Chi's breathing became heavy, Akenta roared, "Damn it, stop right there." This roar exploded like thunder, scaring Fang Chi so much that he almost jumped up. But how could this genius ghost chariot stop at this time? Besides, he was not a fool, so he immediately reacted and ran. As soon as he moved, Akenta understood that he had been fooled. This was simply a great shame. He, a demon lord, was actually deceived by a mere mortal. Not to mention, he had even boasted in front of this human and mocked Brando and Fu Luofa, showing off his superiority. Thinking that his previous performance had fallen into the eyes of Fang Chi, Akenta wished that there was a hole in the ground for him to crawl into. But before that, he understood that it was more important to capture this damn human and kill him to silence him. "You're dead!" Akenta screamed and flew in Fang Chi's direction. At this time, Fang Chi had actually given up all thoughts. There was only one thought in his mind: to run as fast as he could. As long as he got close to the crystal ball, he would be safe. But he never dreamed that he had overestimated the strength of this demon lord's clone, but he still did not expect the other party to be so much faster than him. Just as he took his second step, he felt a sharp whistling sound coming from behind him from within the bright light of the formation. Even if he did not look back, he knew that it was Akenta's claw. "It's over." Fang Chi's heart was filled with despair. Chapter 1406. But the expected attack did not come. Fang Chi heard Akenta roar angrily behind him. The dazzling light of the magic circle in the valley was quickly dimming. A black shadow flashed in front of him, and then he saw a black-haired girl appear beside him. Fang Qi vaguely remembered that this girl was the one who blocked their way before. Knowing that she was an enemy and not a friend, he subconsciously wanted to move aside. But Fu Luofa would not let him do as he wished. She just glanced at him indifferently, and the invisible power of law surged from all directions and wrapped around Fang Qi like a spider web. Fang Qi only felt his body stiffen, and then his hands and feet did not listen to him. He stood straight on the spot. The peak of the Supreme Realm. He immediately understood the gap between him and the other party, and he could not help but feel despair. Brendel was even younger than him, but his strength was far above him. The girl in front of him didn't look too old either. In fact, based on the age of a dragon, his guess wasn't wrong. Her strength was also more than one level higher than him. Poor Fang Qi did not know that he had either encountered a cheater, a demon lord, or a new generation of dragons. For a moment, he doubted his outlook on life and regretted getting involved in this mess. Fu Luofa. Akenta once again retreated outside the magic circle. This demon's avatar was already covered with burn scars, and its body was beginning to fade. Obviously, the magic circle had done a lot of damage to it. It roared angrily, "How dare you sneak attack me? Damn it, do you know what you are doing?" Fu Luofa did not even look at it. As soon as she landed, the 6 dragons landed behind her. They were only slightly slower than her. They were obviously not rejected by the magic circle like the Lord of Purgatory. Fu Luofa looked back at the crystal ball calmly and said coldly, "How disappointing, Akentu. You even dare to be selfish in Master's plan. You have really fallen after mixing with these mortals for thousands of years. You are the one who ruined Master's plan, you damn female lizard. Do you know how important this plan is to Master?" Akenta angrily shouted, "Give that human back to me, we want him to open the gate to the stagnation realm." "Yes, it's we," Flora replied. She looked at her companion. "You've done too many unnecessary things, Akentu, so I declare that you're excluded from this plan. I have to be responsible for the Master. Do you want to face the Master's anger?" Akenta couldn't help but shudder when he heard this. But there is no conflict between the two. The Demon Lord's voice finally weakened, although it was secretly gnashing its teeth in hatred, thinking that the damned flying lizards had come at the wrong time. Only when I lift the seal can I serve Master better. The two are the same thing, and it does not need to waste too much time. Look, I'm already here. Once the seal weakens, I'll be able to enter the stagnation realm. This is why Master is disappointed in you, Akentu, Flora replied coldly. Your thoughts are mixed with too many mortal things, utilitarian, greedy, and self-righteous. You will never understand that no matter what you think, it's not important. What's important is Master's will. If Master didn't let you do it, you can't do it. No, I've never betrayed Master, Akenta shouted in panic. I've been to the stagnation realm before. I know that place better than you. You can't exclude me. Shut up, Akentu. All of a sudden, a voice boomed. It was as if the entire valley was shaking. This voice came from Flora's mouth, but it was deeper and hoarser. If Brando was here, he would be surprised to find that this voice was like a copy of the merchant lady's, but it was obviously more mature and dignified. This voice made the Lord of Purgatory, Akentu's expression contort. He almost knelt down in fear. My Supreme Master, your humble servant has absolutely no intention of betraying you. You can't just listen to that damned female lizard side of the story. She is jealous of me, of your most loyal servant. The Twilight Dragon's voice seemed very distant and deep. It's what was blocked outside the world crystal wall, and it seemed to lack control over this place. However, it still showed its dissatisfaction. You've disappointed me, Akentu. Now, go do your thing. I don't care what your grudge with Flora is. As long as I see that thing, you'll understand what I want. I'm sure I understand your intentions, my lord. I'm afraid there's no one better than me in this world who can understand your meaning better. My lord, I'll definitely do what you've entrusted. Akentu, this great demon, crawled on the ground and answered while trembling. It was hard to believe that this was actually a high-ranked demon lord, a king of purgatory. The pressure that shrouded the valley finally dissipated, but for a moment, no one dared to make any unnecessary sounds. Feng Qi, who was bound by Flora, witnessed this scene with his own eyes. His heart couldn't help but sink. He originally hoped that Brando and his cousin could come to rescue him. But facing this enemy in human legends, the former destroyer of the world, and the ultimate evil described in the Pale Epic, the Twilight Dragon, Feng Qi found that he really didn't feel any hope. After a long while, Akentu's clone got up from the ground while trembling. He cursed the damned dragon in his heart, but at this moment, he didn't dare to show any disrespectful look on his face. At this time, Flora represented the will of the Supreme Master. Although he was a demon lord, the entire demon army was just a branch of the Twilight Force. Not to mention that below the river of scorching heat, he wasn't the first giant. Miss Flora, he hesitated for a moment before saying carefully, I've understood the Master's meaning. Now, what do you want me to do? Flora glanced at the tall demon and didn't even frown, as if the dispute between the two didn't exist. She replied flatly, now, send us into the stagnation realm immediately. This. Akentu looked hesitant when he heard this. The Flora formation clearly showed that it was excluded, which of course made him feel extremely dissatisfied. It had been trapped here for many years, and now was its only hope to get out. Otherwise, it would have to count on its incompetent sheep's-head followers, who knew how many years it would take to completely pry open the seal placed by those damned Bugis. Moreover, the words of the Twilight Dragon before allowed him to survive. Obviously, the Supreme Master was not interested in the filth between him and these dragons. He only needed the results, which meant that he was not completely unimaginable. As long as he achieved his goal in the end, the Master didn't mind who completed it. Of course, he couldn't waste too much time. Thinking of this, the great demon couldn't help but hesitate. Miss Flora, I think the Master wants us to work together. After all, I'm a little older than you and have seen more things than you. Akentu, have you ever thought about why the Master is so angry with you? You're wasting too much time talking about these things here in a roundabout way. Perhaps you've been in the human world for too long, so you've been infected with their bad habits. Flora replied, well, I don't have time to be long-winded with you here. The inheritor of the 9 Phoenix bloodline is already here. Presumably, this matter is not troublesome for you. This is your last chance. Damn ******. Akentu gritted his teeth and cursed in his heart, but he didn't dare to show any dissatisfaction on his face. His crimson eyes turned slightly, and he replied respectfully, well, I understand. In fact, it's very simple to enter the stagnation realm. You're not sealed, so you won't be rejected by this magic circle. As long as you bring him, you can enter the stagnation realm. It's that simple. Flora glanced at the Lord of Purgatory suspiciously. In her opinion, this Lord of Purgatory wouldn't compromise so easily. This is the main battlefield of the Fourth War. These humans are the mortal descendants of the Zanas. The Zanas sealed the old world here just to prevent us from entering. Akentu looked at the dragon girl angrily. It has no defense against you despicable species of order, especially with the inheritor of the Zana's bloodline as the key to open this door. It's not an exaggeration to say that this door is a smooth path for you. Ferofa frowned slightly. She knew that Akentu was right, but Akentu's respectful behavior aroused her suspicion. This infernal king had never been described as respectful or honest in any of the legends left behind in history. Miss Flora, if you have any doubts about this, I'm willing to lead the way for you. Akentu saw Flora's hesitation and smiled, revealing his white sharp teeth. But you have to help me suppress the power of this magic circle. Otherwise, I won't dare to come in my current state. As he spoke, he deliberately showed his clone's weak appearance. Although he did look battered and exhausted now, after being attacked by the magic circle several times, this clone had difficulty even maintaining its basic form. Chapter 1407. No need, Fuluofa replied coldly, you better not play any tricks. Otherwise, you won't just have to face our anger. Ha, Kenta laughed, of course, Miss Fuluofa, the winner takes all. In our demon world, strength is everything. Now that you represent the will of that Supreme Master, I have no choice but to submit to you. This isn't a big deal in our eyes. Fuluofa didn't comment on Akenta's words. Of course, she wasn't stupid enough to believe him. She didn't let down her guard at all, but she took a few steps closer to Feng Qi and planned to try dragging him into the stagnation realm. You stay here, Akenta, she said, that human will soon find this place. You must stop him. This is Lord Twilight Dragon's order. I understand. You better understand that when this matter comes to an end, Milord will consider the issue of your seal. You have to understand one thing. Our lives were given to us by Milord. Such a small matter is not worth mentioning to Milord. Furthermore, the seal here surrounds the stagnation realm. Once the stagnation realm is under Milord's control, do you think the seal itself will still be stable? Akenta's eyes lit up, and he quickly nodded. Of course I understand. I didn't think it through enough, Miss Fuluofa. I'll teach that damn human a lesson, but I'm afraid I'm not his opponent. After all, most of my strength is contained within the seal. It's fine. Fuluofa glanced at him, you just have to do your best. She deliberately emphasized the word do your best. Of course, Fuluofa didn't expect this demon lord to really do his best. For these selfish and cunning creatures, they could only cause a little trouble for that human. Of course, that was enough for her. Sure enough, Akenta agreed without hesitation, but it was obvious that there was no sincerity between the expressions of the two. Fuluofa knew what the other party was thinking. After confirming that the other party wouldn't dare to mess with her master's plan, she walked towards the crystal ball in the middle of the valley with the others. Just as the High Demon Lord had said, the entrance to the stagnation realm didn't reject them like before. Flora slowly approached the beautiful sphere floating in the air and carefully placed her hand on it. However, nothing happened after that. She only felt the cold temperature in her palm. Bring him here. She ordered her companions. Immediately, someone dragged Feng Qi, who looked like a piece of wood, over. The tall dragon, who looked like a blue dragon or an azure dragon, grabbed Feng Qi's right hand and pressed it on the crystal ball. And it was at this moment that a miracle occurred. The entire crystal ball that was suspended in mid-air clearly became brighter. The scenes that were originally in the crystal ball emerged and floated outside the crystal ball. At this moment, Feng Qi's hand was passing through these scenes and disappearing on the other side of the crystal ball. This is indeed a teleportation gate. The blue dragon nodded. Take his hand back. The blue dragon obeyed and then looked up at the changes in the crystal ball. After confirming that there were no changes, he said, the teleportation gate is in a maintained state. You go in first, Hasiloa. If you can return, we will wait for you for 5 minutes. This should be a one-way teleportation gate. Its exit shouldn't be here, Flora. It doesn't matter, Flora replied indifferently, it's just to be safe. The blue dragon nodded and jumped into the teleportation gate on the surface of the crystal ball. The scene on the surface of the crystal ball shook for a while before returning to normal. Can you come back, Hasiloa? Flora asked. However, there was no response from the other side of the crystal ball. What's going on? Fuluofa turned around and glanced at Akenta. The Lord of Purgatory only smiled in response. As you can see, Miss Flora, this is a one-way teleportation gate. I believe that you dragons understand this law better than us. You can't expect sound to pass through the distance between two planes, right? Only a person who doesn't understand the law of space and time would think that the distance between two planes is only a few millimeters. Flora knew that she wouldn't get the real answer, but she also understood that at this time, she could only choose to believe in this disgusting alliance. Fortunately, at least she understood that they wouldn't dare to betray their common master. She turned back and entered the teleportation gate. Akenta silently watched the last dragon enter the teleportation gate. After confirming that there were no outsiders in the valley, the demon lord let out a sigh of relief. Stupid lizards. He opened his mouth and revealed a strange smile. Do you think you can enter the stagnation realm without me? What wishful thinking. Ha, I wish you a pleasant journey. After saying that, the greater demon carefully looked around as if he was afraid that his words would be leaked. Then, his avatar gradually disappeared in the valley. Brando looked at the corpses in front of him. These people were wearing typical black missionary robes with red embroidery on the cuffs and corners of the robes. There was also a sheephead pin on the collar. Obviously, these people were sheephead believers, and not ordinary believers. They belonged to the core of this sect and were the upper class of the sheephead religion. This was a valley. Hundreds of sheephead believers' corpses were piled up at the bottom of the valley. Huang Hua and Mr. Liu found several traces left by sacrificial rituals. The scene was a mess, and blood flowed like a river. Obviously, most of these people died of suicide. The sheephead believers used a hook-shaped dagger to stab diagonally into their hearts from below their throats. The venom on the blade would maintain their consciousness before their nerve venom would drain their blood. It was said that in such a death, mortals would experience the most terrible pain in the world. Pain was the nourishment of demons, just like the accompanying fear and regret. Only such a death could maximize the meaning of a living sacrifice. This was a noble act of martyrdom in the core doctrine of the sheephead religion. However, Brando understood that this kind of martyrdom was rarely seen in the upper class of the cult because even demons needed capable assistants. Of course, they would not let their trusted subordinates become living sacrifices. Anyway, whether it was the disciples of the Black Flame, the sheephead believers, or the silver heavenly snake in the south of White Mountain, most of the cultists who were involved with demons had no lack of middle and lower class believers, as well as the innocent lives they had abducted. They always had living sacrifices. But there were always exceptions. When the demons needed it, even the highest level of the sheephead believers would not hesitate to sacrifice their lives for their master. Just like now. Although Brando did not have time to stay here for long, he could see that almost all the people who died here were the middle and upper class members of the sheephead believers. These people should be the sheephead believers brought here by Akentu. It seemed that the Lord of Purgatory urgently needed to borrow the power of a living sacrifice, even sacrificing his trusted subordinates. Did you find anyone alive? He turned back and asked the Prime Minister's daughter who came from afar. In such a large-scale sacrificial event, it is impossible for everyone to be martyred. There will always be some people who stay to check if there are people who take advantage of the chaos and execute those who have no courage. And the people who presided over the ceremony can't be dead, they must be nearby. It's difficult, Allah's replied. These people may have run away long ago. Besides, Flofa and the others passed by here. It is impossible to leave anyone alive. Miss Flofa and the others should have passed by this valley from the sky. The valley is concealed by magic. If you don't pay attention, it is difficult to find the mystery below, Brando replied. There are only dead people here. The most sensitive to the smell of the dead are the undead of Madara, but there are no undead here. Only living things can easily attract their attention. Allah's heard this and shut her mouth. She understood that Brando had a point. If they did not have to rely on Delphian to find the way and had to move between the valleys, they would not have found this valley. Akenta set up a scene of a living sacrifice ceremony on this path, obviously with a purpose. "I think we should hurry up and catch up," the little female dragon said anxiously. Instead of looking for the reason here, Akenta may have used these people to create the psychic fog that deceives our perception. "Didn't you say that, Brando? The demons need the power of a living sacrifice to create the psychic fog." "But it doesn't need so much," Brando replied. "Akenta sacrificed so many high-ranking believers. I'm curious why it needs so much power so urgently." "That's why we should hurry up," Allah said with a frown. "Otherwise, I doubt that Fong Chi will be alive to see us." Brando heard this and shook his head silently. He slowly walked through the mountains of corpses and looked at the other side of the valley. He felt from the beginning that this matter was not so simple, and at this moment, this feeling became even stronger. A good game player always instinctively believed in their intuition, and he was naturally the same. Needless to say, whether it was the experience of the elemental frontier or Akenta's strange whereabouts, all pointed to this point. This demon obviously had other intentions. Chapter 1408. It was not that Brando did not care about Fong Chi's life or death, but Brando knew better that if he did not understand Akenta's intentions and rushed into the trap set by the other party, it would only make the situation worse. As for Fong Chi, he fell into the hands of the other party, but as the key and means to open the stagnation realm, he thought that Akenta would not kill Fong Chi so easily. Even if Fong Chi had to die, it would have to wait until the other party found the secret in the stagnation realm. Therefore, at least for the time being, Fong Chi should be relatively safe. And if they had not plunged into Akenta's trap, the man from the phantom chariot would only be safer. Sure enough, it did not take long for Phoenix Flame to find the host of the ritual hiding in the valley. This person was called Lando, a high-ranking temple priest in the Sheephead cult. He had more than a dozen guards around him at the time, but these mortal guards were not worth mentioning in the eyes of Allahs. Because Brando did not let them live, in the end, only the priest survived. When he saw Brando, he was obviously scared out of his wits. The higher the status, the more you cherish your life. This sentence was vividly reflected in this cult priest. Compared to his brothers and sisters who generously died for him, this priest clearly did not cherish his own life as much as his love for his master. Brendel only threatened him a little, and the priest spilled out everything he knew like beans pouring out of beans. The magic circle sealing Akentu is divided into 3 layers. Its outer layer covers the entire Takik area, and the inner layer is the Green Sea Triangle area, the so-called sacred land of Atuk. The 3rd layer of the magic circle is here. In order to confirm this last question, Brando repeatedly asked 3 times before finally confirming that the 3rd layer of the magic circle sealing Akentu, which was also the core layer of this huge seal, was located in the last channel of the lunar channel. It took the Sheephead cult 50 years to finally find this place, and the reason why Flora and Akenta could travel freely in the lunar channel was also because they had entered and exited here many times in the early days, and already knew the terrain inside like the back of their hand. Brando looked up and his face became serious. This living sacrifice ritual transmits power to the 3rd layer of the seal. Is it to strengthen the seal? But why would it do that? Is Akenta crazy? Allahs asked, puzzled. Brando shook his head. Transmitting power to the 3rd layer of the seal and strengthening the seal are 2 different things. The key is what the power does after it is transmitted in that direction. That is the core of the problem. It's a pity that this useless fellow can't explain anything. The female dragon looked at Lando's corpse with pity. Of course, Brendel wasn't going to let this evil cultist leader live. After squeezing every last bit of value out of him, he had Mr. Liu take action. Of course, at least he gave Lando a quick death. For this evil cultist leader, that was the greatest mercy he could give. They're just Akentu's servants, that's all. Brendel looked at the corpses that littered the valley and could not help but sigh at the ignorance and superstition of these people. The Lord of Purgatory couldn't have told them too much. The fact that Lando knows so much is already a sign that he's being careful. The little female dragon was obviously very dissatisfied with the guy's cowardice, because it wasted a lot of their time. Teacher, what do we do next? At this time, Huang Hua also asked. The little princess of the Jade Phoenix bloodline was a little pale, and the scene in front of her had caused a great shock to her. Princess Magadol, on the other hand, was a little calmer. After all, she had already seen the way the cultists did things in Rushta. But as a believer in God, her face was still a little ugly. I believe that Flora and the others discovered this valley, Brendel thought for a moment and replied, but just like what we thought before, they probably did not investigate this place thoroughly. They probably thought that the living sacrifice ritual was just to create the soul fog in front of us. Akenta played a trick. He knew that his dragon allies did not know much about the sheephead cult, so he set up such a double-meaning trap. The mind fog was not only targeted at us, but also Flora and the rest. But why? Huang Hua was stunned. Teacher, aren't they allies? Allies can also have different demands. Brando frowned. He kept digging out his past understanding of the cultists and the demons from the depths of his memory, and had a faint answer in his heart. Especially when this kind of purpose conflicts with each other, with the selfish and cruel character of the demons, they can do anything, it's over. The little female dragon said in despair. So, weren't we too late from the beginning? Brando frowned. It was indeed a little tricky now. The key was that even if they reacted at the beginning, as long as Flora did not detect the conspiracy, the result would still be the same. The Lord of Purgatory, who was known as the most cunning demon, was indeed extraordinary in playing tricks. I hope it's not too late. He sighed. Otherwise, we may have a tough battle. The moment Flora entered the portal, she realized that they were still fooled. In other words, although Akenta did not deceive them on this point, the cunning guy concealed the most crucial information: the portal did not lead directly to the stagnation realm. That despicable guy obviously knew this early on, but did not remind them. What appeared in front of these dragons was an extremely strange world. This world was suspended in the void. The whole world was neither up nor down, nor left or right. It was as if it had no front or back, and there was no passage of time. There was only a monotonous gray in the world, but the clouds in the distance were rolling, and purple lightning constantly flashed from them. This world seemed to be extremely narrow, but also extremely vast. Because the world they observed through their vision was vast and boundless, and there was no edge. This kind of spiritual feeling and visual contradiction was enough to make them feel extremely uncomfortable, as if they existed in a completely fictitious and distorted time. The dragons were the most sensitive to magic, including Flora. They only took a moment to confirm that this was the world under the huge magic formation in the valley. This is Akenta's sealed world. Flora gritted her teeth and said word by word. This sealed world existed between the stagnation realm and the present world. To be precise, the Bukas used this magic formation to seal Akenta in the gap between the two worlds, in this fictitious world. The Silver Folk used this sealing magic formation as the last barrier outside the gate of the stagnation realm. Not only did they seal this terrible demon, but they also blocked all the covetous eyes on the stagnation realm. Akenta obviously knew this long ago. But he deliberately did not tell anyone. Akenta, Flora said in a dangerous voice. She was suspended in the middle of this world, and her low voice seemed to spread in all directions. You're playing with fire. The voice of the Purgatory Lord came from the void. Damn female lizard, do you remember what I said? Without me, you can forget about going to the stagnation realm. He paused, then continued proudly, do you think this world is as simple as you think? If that's the case, we wouldn't have stopped here back then. The Bukas are not idiots, especially in that era, they were not as down and out as they are today. I understand. Flora calmed down after hearing Akenta's long speech. I was wondering why you stopped in front of the magic formation and did those useless things when you inherited the bloodline of the descendant of the 9 phoenixes. She looked coldly at the void and said calmly, I see. Once the stagnation realm is opened, the moon's channel will be completely annihilated, and your 3rd seal will be lost in the void. Do you understand now, stupid woman? Akenta sneered. My servant and I spent decades to find this place. Seeing the hope of seeing the light of day again, I naturally won't let your stupid actions make all these efforts go to waste. So the strange actions you did with the descendant of the 9 phoenixes was not to open the gate to the stagnation realm, but to find a way to break the seal. That's right. Akenta was a little annoyed. Originally, there was no conflict between the two. After my seal was undone, with the descendants of Ziana in hand, opening the stagnation realm was a very simple matter. But you people are too inflexible and insist on killing me. I can only regretfully say that I will absolutely not tolerate this. But from what you've done before, it's not as simple as you think, Flofer calmly replied. Instead, you're risking Master's plan, and you're even willing to harm Master's interests to serve your own interests. Shut up! Akenta roared. For a moment, the entire void changed color. It was as if it was only in this world that it finally regained the demeanor of a demon lord. Don't always use my master's name to suppress me. I want you to understand, damned lizards, that I am the master's most outstanding and loyal servant. Even without you hindrances, I can still get things done. After a moment, the Lord of Purgatory seemed to be angered by the unchanging disdain on Flora's face. He furiously said, What, you don't believe me? You think I just wanted to ruin Master's plan on a whim? Ha! Akenta sneered. You will soon find out that my plan is foolproof. And your appearance in this place proves one point. You will soon see what kind of power a true demon king has. Chapter 1409. After the two parties left, the valley returned to silence from the brief clamor. But soon, the peace was once again broken by the newcomers. Brando was the first to step into the basin, followed by Delphian, Huanghua, and the rest. The little female dragon ran from the back to the front, while Magadal was at the back of the team, escorting the two sisters. This world woven by the lines of law was not covered by any vegetation, so Brando could see the structure of the basin between the hills at a glance. The whole world was dark, and the ground was like a transparent glass plate above the abyss. The silver lines of law formed the undulations of the surface. In the distance, it formed a dry river valley. Brando stopped. He first saw the huge crystal ball in the basin, and then a look of confusion appeared on his face. What's wrong? The Prime Minister's daughter followed behind him and noticed the slight change in Brando's emotions and asked. Brando shook his head. He felt that he had been here before. Maybe it was because he was too nervous these days, he thought. Ever since the trip to the elemental frontier, he rarely had the chance to relax. Alaz had already run down the mountain. She stopped not far away, raised her head and sniffed her small nose, and then shouted, Stinky human, Flora has been here before. Brando was not surprised by this answer. The group went down the basin, and Magadal looked around. In fact, there was nothing to see in this barren environment, but people would always be subconsciously vigilant in an unfamiliar environment. Huanghua, Ling, and Lien clustered around her, making the nun princess look like a nanny of the monastery. This world reflects the barren and lifeless world. Mr. Brando, what kind of world is behind it, to reflect such a scene in the world of law? A completely dead world, Alaz replied as she looked back from afar. The stagnant realm is that dead world. It is even more lifeless than the legendary kingdom of the dead because it is a completely still world. After it was abandoned by the gods, this world's time has always been stagnant at that last moment. Speaking of which, the little female dragon replied, stroking her chin, it should be the war that created this scene, a war that has lasted since time immemorial, so tragic that it is beyond all of our imaginations. If Vaughn cannot escape this fate, it will eventually fall into the same world. Magadal frowned and bit her lip. I hope we can defeat the Twilight Dragon. Wond will not become like this. Alaz glanced at her. She did not tell her that Wond's elemental boundary had collapsed. If it were not for Brando and the sages of the previous era, this world would not be far from such a scene. My teacher said that we cannot give up resisting. The way of the sword also told me that even in a desperate situation, we must stay true to our hearts. Huang He replied quietly. The descendants of the Jade Phoenix will not give up without a fight. We will resist until the last moment. Magadal thought of the Holy Cathedral of Fire. Was the way of the Golden Flame not the same? The legacy left behind by the four sages was inherited by their descendants. There must be some outstanding people among them who would have the same understanding, right? She raised her head and looked at Brando, who was not far away. Ling and Lien did not speak. They only listened to the others quietly. Things about the Twilight Dragon were too far away from the world they were familiar with. Fortunately, the two sisters had always been calm in the face of danger, while Lien was intelligent and had already blended in with the others. Mr. Liu inspected the magic circle in the valley under Brando's guidance. The latter was a little surprised. There were many mages in the Nine Phoenix. As a member of the noble circle, he was naturally immersed in the knowledge of magic. The magic circle here is directly based on the laws of this place. This is the first time I have seen such a method. Could it be that the magic circle can rely on something other than a physical object? The magic circle itself is the embodiment of the laws. Brando was not surprised. Wond was the origin of modern magic, and the magic civilization was much more prosperous than the Nine Phoenix. Their theoretical knowledge was far ahead of the latter. In fact, Tumen invented a magic circle that does not rely on a physical object, which is his elemental pattern. However, it took a long time for this method to be passed down to the mortals. He paused and looked at the magic circle hidden in the entire valley. But the magic circle here is not the work of mortals. It is the masterpiece of the Bugas. This magic circle is only the core part of a huge magic circle, but it is also the most sophisticated. Alaz heard this from the front and could not help but turn around and look at Brando curiously. Hey, I remember you were only a third-rate elementalist. Stinky human, how did you see the structure of the magic circle here? What was a third-rate elementalist? He was only a part-time elementalist because he had no other choice. But this little female dragon's mouth was too vicious. Brando took a long time to react and replied snappily, this is Lut's knowledge. Alaz looked left and right, only to find that the little fairy had disappeared. TSK, she snorted softly and said with dissatisfaction, I also saw the structure of this magic circle. This should be the magic circle that sealed Akentu. So that's how it is, it was sealed in the stagnation realm. No wonder it was in such a hurry to unlock the seal of the stagnation realm. It was to get out of there. Allah's face showed a troubled look again. But if that's the case, isn't it troublesome? Should we enter the stagnation realm? Will that release that guy? Isn't that demon no match for Mr. Brando? Lotus asked curiously. Stinky human, you only killed one of Akenta's avatars. The strength of the sheep-headed demon itself was not bad. After all, it was a famous demon lord under the scorching river. It was one of the main commanders of the Twilight Dragon Legion at that time. Its true body, Alaz looked at everyone present and replied word by word, none of us here are a match for it. It should be at least the strength of a demigod. Then what should we do? The nun princess asked nervously. Don't worry. Brando waited for the little female dragon to finish speaking before he said, things may not be that bad. I think Akentu's sealed place may not be the stagnation realm. Stinky human, but this magic circle is obviously. Alaz raised her eyebrows and said unhappily. It has nothing to do with the magic circle. Have you forgotten Flora? Hearing the name Flora, the little female dragon obediently shut her mouth, but she still stared fiercely at Brando with her big golden eyes, as if the latter did not give a reasonable explanation, she would jump up and bite him. Brando's heart skipped a beat as he was stared at by this fellow, and quickly replied, the Twilight Dragon sent Flora and the others here, it may not be to unlock the seal for Akentu. In this regard, Brando still insisted on his opinion. Otherwise, there would be no need for Akentu to fight with Flora and the others. I think we should stick to our previous deduction, the two sides must have different goals and interests. Is Miss Flora really here for the Stagnation Realm? Magadol asked. This time, it was the Prime Minister's daughter who answered in place of Brando. Although Delphian did not speak much along the way, this did not mean that she was indifferent, but her attention had been focused on the riddle of the emerald. In fact, she agreed with Brando's opinion. My lord's opinion is most likely correct. If we can't think of other possibilities, without the support of logic, we should choose a more logical deduction, Delphian said. If that's the case, Akentu's goal can't be to unlock the seal of the Stagnation Realm. Or at least, it's not just that. If the interests of both sides are the same, no matter how chaotic the demons are, they will not panic. What if they are just putting on a show for us? Is that necessary? All right, Alaz said dejectedly. She actually did not care about this problem, but she was afraid that if things went wrong, Flora and the others who might have fallen into Akentu's hands would be in even more danger. Although that was just one of Brando's deductions, the Dragoness actually agreed with this deduction. Her worries were similar to Brando's, she did not want Akentu to become stronger because the seal was broken. But now, it was obvious that it was impossible not to take the risk. She sighed. You've convinced me. What do we do next? Enter the Stagnation Realm directly. No, I don't support that. A sharp voice sounded. Everyone looked up and found that it was Lute who had flown back. The little fairy descended from the sky and landed on Lotus's shoulder. His face was bright red and it was obvious that he had flown quite a distance. Then the little fairy said to the others, this magic circle is just as Mr. Brando had guessed. Its place of seal is not in the Stagnation Realm, or else the magic circle would not be on this moon's channel. I think the Bugis sealed Akentu in the plane between the Stagnation Realm and the moon's channel, and cleverly used this magic circle to form a door. The Lord of the Purgatory had been the gatekeeper of the Bugis for thousands of years. I don't quite understand, Mr. Lute, Magadol asked. Is there a gap between worlds? Chapter 14:10. Of course, but the moon's channel is not actually a world. At best, it's just a half-bit wall with incomplete laws. Lute raised his head and looked around the world, then said, this may have been part of the elemental territory of the Stagnation Realm before, but it was completely destroyed in the war, leaving only this incomplete fragment. The Bugis forged it into the scene we see now. This was done through powerful magic. At this point, Lute's face also showed a sad look, because he suddenly thought of Won's elemental territory. His hometown was the same at the moment, torn apart. His people, Miss Tata's people, were still wandering somewhere at this moment. He paused, then continued to answer, the modern Bugis may not have such means. I suspect that there may be divine people who helped them complete such a great project. Of course, in that era, everything was possible. Brando stopped the sprite from further explaining in theory, and only said, the gap between the worlds has long been demonstrated by mages. In fact, it is part of the Sea of Magic. We call this part the ether plane and the astral plane. It is full of magic power more powerful than our world, and between the two worlds, such space is often closed, so what Lute said is possible. So, Lute nodded, very satisfied with Brando's interruption. To be honest, the sprites were professional elementalists and mages. Although his profession was a swordsman, he was far more talented in magic than mortals. For a professional mage, it was still quite difficult to explain something so simply. Compared to a dabbler like Brando, I think we can choose a simpler way, which is to bypass this seal directly and enter the stagnation realm. Bypass the seal. Everyone was taken aback. Yes, there is an additional benefit to doing this. The Moon's channel will complete its historical mission after the opening of the stagnation realm and disappear completely. In this way, Akenta's sealed place will fall into the gap between the void. Its sheephead followers may not be able to find the illusory sealed place even after 10,000 years. What's more, entering the void itself is a time-consuming and extremely dangerous thing. In other words, Princess Magadal said in surprise, it's equivalent to strengthening the seal on the Lord of Purgatory, right? Yes. That's great. Even Mr. Liu's face showed interest, and he said, in this way, isn't it killing two birds with one stone? No. The little female dragon shouted loudly, causing everyone to look at her in astonishment. Why, Miss Alaz? Magadal looked at the little female dragon strangely. What's wrong with this plan? You're saying that those mortals will bypass me and directly open the stagnation realm. Akenta's voice rumbled in the void like thunder rolling in the clouds. Its strength as a main demon was fully displayed in this sealed space. Even Fu Luofa and the other dragons couldn't stand steadily, let alone Fang Qi, who was in the crowd. His face was already pale, and he was sweating profusely. At this time, he felt that his consciousness had begun to waver. Although the little female dragon used a dragon spell to shield the seed of consciousness in his heart, that spell was only effective against Akenta's doppelganger, and against a Lord of Purgatory, this spell was not enough. Fortunately, Akenta did not care about such a useless mortal. Anyway, in its eyes, Fang Qi's life was just a matter of taking, and there was no need to waste any energy on such a worm. At this moment, it seemed to have heard the funniest thing, and said contemptuously, no, they won't. That young leader, although extremely powerful, is a soft-hearted and indecisive guy. Akenta pointed at Fang Qi. With this guy here, they will never banish this sealed space into the void, or they will never see their companions again. When Fang Qi heard this, it was as if he was struck by lightning, and his face became extremely ugly. If it was anyone else in the team, he believed that Brando might really not hesitate to open the seal and fight with Akenta. But he was different. He knew that although he was forced to join this adventure team, in fact, he did not reach an agreement with Wang Hua and that heroine. In the end, it was just that he was not as strong as them, and had to listen to Brando's orders. In such a situation, would Brando be willing to risk releasing a Lord of Purgatory to save him? Fang Qi felt that if he were in his shoes, he would not make such a stupid choice. Not to mention how risky this was, just the reappearance of Akenta was bad news for Wond. The more Fang Qi thought about it, the more he felt that the hope was slim. He could not help but look defeated, thinking that it was a complete failure for him to get involved in this mess. And now, he was going to pay the price for this failure. Fu Luofa was disdainful of Akenta's words. Mortals are often fickle. I think everyone knows which is more important for them to save their companions or release a Lord of Purgatory. Putting millions of people in danger in order to save one person, anyone with intelligence would not make such a judgment. In theory, that's true. Akenta was not nervous. But the other person with the right to speak in that team seems to be your companion, right? The Lord of Purgatory carefully observed Fu Luofa's expression. It seemed to want to see a mixture of shock, uneasiness, and regret from this dragon girl's face. Unfortunately, to its disappointment, Fu Luofa only frowned. That was my former companion, but unfortunately, he is not loyal to Master. Akenta somewhat appreciated this coldness. Perhaps, but I don't think that little girl thinks so. She knows that you are here, and I'm afraid she will not allow others to make such a judgment. In other words, you are also using us as a bargaining chip. Fu Luofa replied coldly. It's your honor. Fu Luofa did not want to talk nonsense with this guy. She faintly felt that this matter was not that simple, so she stopped talking and watched coldly from the side. On the other side, in the valley, Brando also shook his head at the same time. Allah's is right. Other than Miss Fu Luofa, Fang Qi is also among them. We can't do that. He glanced at Huang Hua, thought for a moment, and explained, Huang Hua, no matter what his previous faction was, he was accidentally captured in our team. We have a responsibility to any of our companions in this team. In the team of adventurers, we will not abandon any of our companions. I understand, teacher. Huang Hua nodded calmly. Although the Ghost Chariot and the Jade Phoenix were feuds, she did not care to add insult to injury at such a time. I have heard of similar vows in some mercenary groups in the north. Mr. Liu was a little surprised by Brando's words. I heard that this was an agreement between ancient mercenaries, but it has been invalid for a long time. I heard that this matter has something to do with the Sacred Covenant. Brando nodded. This was the agreement of the Grey Mercenaries. In fact, it was an oath born out of the Sacred Covenant. This oath was widely spread in the 10 cities, but in modern times, it had lost its effectiveness. Instead, in the game, this agreement became one of the rules that players abided by. It was also one of the cornerstones of the existence of player guilds in The Amber Sword. The first time he heard of this oath, it was his senior sister who personally told him about it. But he quickly skipped this topic. The current situation was similar to the worst-case scenario he had expected. He had guessed that such a thing might happen during the previous live sacrifice ceremony. The power that Akenta gained from the live sacrifice ceremony was obviously used on its own seal. But it was not to strengthen the seal, but to accumulate the power to break the seal. This power may not be enough for this huge seal, but if combined with the loosening of the seal outside, it would be enough. And it may be far more than that. The seal of the Bugis should be closed in many directions, whether it was the seal of the moon's channel leading to Akentu, or the seal leading to the moon's channel, leading to the stagnant realm, or vice versa, they were all completely closed. But Akenta should have used the power of the live sacrifice ceremony to open one of the one-way channels, the portal of the moon's channel leading to its sealed place, which was much simpler than breaking the seal itself. But in this case, they had to hold back. But for this, Brando had already made a judgment in his heart. We have to enter the stagnant realm. When he spoke, everyone quieted down at the same time. If we have to open Akentu's seal, we have to at least ensure the integrity of this magic circle. What do you mean, Brando? Let me explain. Lute understood what Brando meant and replied. This seal magic circle is closed in many directions. It closes the many exits of the ether plane where the sealed place is located from the magical structure. If we have to open this seal, we have to guide Akenta to break through the exit that at least wants to break through to reduce the loss. For example, what we need is a one-way exit into the stagnant realm, so we don't need to open the exit of the stagnant realm to the moon's channel or the green sea outside, and vice versa for the sealed place. I understand. At this time, the others also understood. That is to say, let Akenta break through the seal in the direction of the stagnant realm. So even if it breaks through the seal, it will only reach the stagnant realm, and the connection between the stagnant realm sealed by this magic circle and the wound will not be opened. Lute nodded. Chapter 14:11. This was a good idea, and everyone agreed. But soon, they realized where the problem lay. Everyone, including Alaz, fell silent and looked at Brando. Although this would delay Akenta's arrival time in Wound, it would be a great risk for them. Because if that happened, they would most likely have to face a real demon lord in the stagnation realm. That was not something that Akenta's doppelganger could compare to. We have no choice, Brando replied. Even if Akento reaches this side, with his personality, he will not let us go. And in terms of breaking the seal, he may conflict with the phallus, but Akento is also under the command of the Twilight Dragon. Even if he breaks the seal from the Green Sea side, he will still find a way to enter the stagnation realm to cause trouble for us. Don't forget that Mr. Fong Chi is still in his hands. After the moon's channel disappears, it will not be difficult for him to enter the stagnation realm. So in comparison, the first choice is obviously much better, Mr. Liu nodded. Choose the lesser of two evils. Most of the people present did not understand the meaning of this sentence, but it meant that they understood Mr. Liu's meaning. Brando also waved his hand. Since the decision was made, then it was to be executed immediately. Unnecessary discussion was unnecessary now. Knowing that they were about to face a big battle, everyone present could not help but be more nervous. After all, it was not like the battle with the Void Reaver, the opponent was a demon lord. In terms of strength, it was close to the existence of a god. Modifying the seal itself was not complicated, especially with Phoenix Hua, a descendant of the 9 Phoenix bloodline in the team. Brando and the others were different from Akento. They were not rejected by the magic circle, so it did not take long for Alaz and Magadal to make some basic changes to the core of the magic circle under Lut's guidance. Fortunately, Brando's request was only to open up a one-way tunnel to the stagnation realm. Otherwise, with their abilities, it would take more than a day or two to complete this massive project. After all, this huge sealing circle was the masterpiece of the Buga people in the era when the Silver Library of Babel Fortress had not been lost. Akento and his followers spent decades of effort to dismantle the periphery of the circle little by little. Although its core was not as large as the 2 circles outside, it was not to be underestimated. The method of modifying it was not complicated for the descendants of the Xiana, but the work was complicated and trivial. It took a full 4 hours for Alaz and the other 2 to complete the basic preparations. When the last step was completed, the 3 of them let out a long sigh of relief. The little female dragon frowned and complained, if it's just a path to the stagnant realm, there's no need to go through so much trouble. It's all that damned sheep-headed guy's fault, Alaz's strange words that came out from time to time, even the nun princess who worked with her could only smile helplessly. The terrifying demon lord in the eyes of ordinary people was like an irreconcilable enemy to this young lady. After getting Lut's approval, Brando finally brought Huang Hua to the crystal ball suspended in the center of the valley. He looked down at his student who he had not known for long. Even in such a situation, the latter was calm and steady enough. Are you ready? Brando asked. Huang Hua nodded. She wore the pair of 9 phoenix gloves on her hands, and the green jade sword had been sheathed and hung at her waist. At this time, the long sword had become a backup for her. After a series of battles, she had become more and more skilled in close combat techniques. Speaking of which, the little princess of the Jade Phoenix bloodline had been practicing swordsmanship for far longer than the time she had been learning under Brando, but the latter's talent seemed to be innate. Although such talent depended on herself, Huang Hua's gratitude to her teacher had not faded at all because if it were not for Brando, she might not have been able to find a path that was truly suitable for her in her life. Get ready. Huang Hua stretched out her right hand and reached for the crystal ball. As the crystal ball was suspended high, she even had to tiptoe to touch the surface of the crystal ball. Seeing this, Brando directly cast a levitation spell on her to make it easier for his student. After all, this movement might last for a few minutes. At the same time, the scene that Fong Chi had seen before reappeared again. The scene on the crystal ball emerged. But this time, the scale was far greater than before. Even the magic circle in the entire valley became bright and dazzling. Now! Brando shouted. It was as though the world and the void had fallen into silence ever since the argument a moment ago. However, Fu Luofa knew that this was only on the surface. The Lord of Purgatory was making various preparations and attempts to break the seal. She even believed that even if the humans outside didn't come, Akenta would still have a way to break the seal. Otherwise, he wouldn't have specially captured the 9 phoenixes. In fact, Fuluafa's only goal was to enter the stagnation realm and complete her master's order. As for other matters, she was indifferent. Although Akenta's private actions made her a little annoyed, that was all. In comparison, she was actually more happy to see this Purgatory Lord succeed. However, she had a faint intuition in her heart that told her that things were not that simple. Of course, she naturally wouldn't warn Akenta. Moreover, Akenta might not listen to her. The dragons behind Fuluafa all followed her lead and wouldn't easily speak. As for Fang Qi, he had fallen into a terrifying silence ever since the argument between Fuluafa and Akenta. This genius of the ghost chariot clearly thought that he was going to die this time. He was reminiscing about the past and suddenly realized that being mediocre wasn't so bad. At least he wouldn't be courting death. While Fang Qi was enlightened, the burning dusk, Lord of Purgatory Akenta was silently waiting for something with an anxious attitude. He put down all the work at hand and didn't even pay attention to the captured human because he felt the magic circle loosen up. Everything was as he expected. This demon king couldn't help but want to laugh out loud and sing a song. But at this moment, the entire world in the void suddenly shook. Even Fuluafa saw that the lightning between the rolling clouds in the void suddenly became denser. The entire world was reflected in a layer of dangerous purple-red light. This sudden change even pulled Fang Qi, who was in deep thought, back to reality. He raised his head and screamed. Because he saw that the space not far from him was twisting. Tens of millions of purple spatial cracks and vortexes appeared in that narrow space. The scene of chaos was no less than the beginning of the world. These are the coordinates to the stagnation realm. Akenta's voice was reserved and proud. I've already expected your little scheme, rats. But now the positions of the hunter and the prey have been swapped. Several passages opened at the same time. Fang Qi looked at the vortex-like portal that appeared in the void. He had already seen the other side of the purple vortex, the desolate and lifeless world. The land that looked like it was covered in rust and darkness filled his vision on the other side of the portal. But at this moment, there was only shock left in his mind. Those people actually came in. They even did not hesitate to release a Purgatory King to open the seal and save him. Although Brando's purpose was not as simple as saving him, at this moment, this genius of the Phantom Chariot lineage was filled with great gratitude for the first time. He could not help but blink, feeling as if sand had entered his eyes. Unfortunately, the violent dragons around Fang Qi did not care about the feelings of this genius of the Phantom Chariot. Under Fuluafa's order, all of them threw themselves into those portals. The void world was on the verge of collapse. They only had a chance for a moment. When the last blue dragon threw itself into the portal, the tall dragon turned around and picked up Fang Qi like he was picking up a chicken. Then, he stepped into the vortex. Fang Qi only felt dizzy. When he woke up in the next moment, he found himself in midair. But this was not a normal midair. He did not know if he was tens of thousands of meters in the sky. Below him was an endless silver-gray ground that looked like a huge plain. The plain was riddled with holes and stretched to the end of the horizon, forming a straight skyline. In the distance were the clouds of this world. The clouds were about 1 or 2 kilometers below here, but it was not the snow-white cloud wall that he had seen in Nine Phoenix or Woned, nor was it the dark clouds on a rainy or cloudy day. It was a layer of cloudy clouds that looked like broken cotton. It seemed to have been torn apart by an invisible force as it floated lifelessly in the air. It extended from here to the end of one's field of vision, as if the entire sky was shrouded by this layer of clouds. When Fang Qi saw this world for the first time, he felt endless pressure, as if this was a dead world. But it was not the world of the dead described in the Pale Epic. Instead, the whole world had lost its vitality. It was as if he could only see the dark surface, but Feng Qi could feel that under the surface, it was also cold and silent. There was no flowing lava. It was at this time that the blue dragon that grabbed him suddenly retreated, and a lightning-like radiance flew past Feng Qi's face. This sword light was so familiar that the genius of the phantom chariot, who was originally dismissive of it, suddenly came to life. He looked in that direction with some excitement. Sure enough, he saw the young man from Erewhon. He recognized this sword technique. This was the flash strike sword technique, the legendary sword technique of the head of the four sages of Wonde. Chapter 14:12. Compared to others, the stagnant realm in Brando's eyes was perhaps more real. The vast ground was a mixture of dark brown and mottled red, like a mottled river of pollution, but more of it was gray, the color of cement and metal. Brendel was certain that he was looking at a city of death. The roads that intertwined like a spider's web occupied his entire field of vision. This was a city that he was extremely familiar with, not only because it contained the characteristics of that era, but more importantly, a black tower stood in the middle of the city, and the entire city's road network was like the veins of a hedgehog's nest. He had seen this tower more than once. But in that dream, the black tower was far from as tall as what he saw now. It might be tens of thousands of feet high. Even from a few kilometers away in the air, he could still feel the oppressive pressure of the tower. The giant tower occupied about a quarter of the entire city. With it as a landmark, the field of vision was enough to extend for thousands of kilometers, but even the horizon was affected. It seemed to be narrowed under the contrast and could not accommodate the suffocating scenery. The entire sky and the ground floated with a gray color, like the waste dust of industrialization, or the silent wasteland after a nuclear war. Everything was killed, there was no movement, not even a trace of wind. Although when observed from outside the stagnant realm, some areas of this land may be engulfed in a perfect sandstorm unimaginable by humans. After Brando passed through the portal, his mind was completely attracted by the giant tower in front of him. He seemed to see every sentence of the dark prophecy flashing in the darkness. 16. The TOWR the lost moon took away the light. XX, JUD Jimmy NT the light lost. 17. The STR the silver generation was lost on the earth, marching forward in the darkness and ignorance. 8. STRNGTH the encounter of the Emperor and the Fool. 9. The HRMAT the rusty clockwork was being reset. XXETGWRLD the sword that changed fate. This was a world devoid of life. There was no sun, nor was there a magical moon. However, the entire world was not immersed in darkness. Instead, it reflected a pale gray color. But perhaps complete darkness was better, because darkness could hide the hideous scars. Like now, it gave the illusion of a lifeless corpse lying on a cold bed under the dull light. Brando felt that this was a world that had gone through a trial. Just like the trial described in the Book of Revelation, after the calamity, everything was gone. Whether it was heaven or hell, there was only dead silence left. This was not the Wonde he knew. Instead, it was more like a world he was familiar with. But no, it wasn't the same. That world was not so big and vast. He raised his head, and his dark brown eyes could not reflect the arc of the planet on the horizon. Moreover, this huge tower. In his memory, there was absolutely no such giant tower. Brando had an unreal feeling in his heart. This lifeless city was like a symbolic memory, causing a deeper tremor in the depths of his heart. He actually felt that he had been here before. But there was no relevant memory in his heart at all. Brando suddenly panicked. He felt that the world was calling him. All its laws and powers were in harmony with him. The uncomfortable feeling of being out of place in Vaunt had disappeared. He thought it was the discomfort caused by the other half of his soul. But at this moment, he suddenly understood. He should belong here. He should belong to this stagnant world. What is going on? Brando could not help but groan in his heart. What is this place? He closed his eyes. He seemed to see something. It was a blue metal nameplate. The surface was slightly bent. The edges and the oxidized paint were full of red rust. On the nameplate, there were convex letters inscribed Umsotruptas Lames 00432408_IR433 WD 1044. Stem B, 25th. Then these words twisted in front of him and converged into a new noun, stagnant realm. Silver Plains. Teacher. Suddenly, Brando heard someone calling him from the horizon. It seemed to be a familiar voice. Yes, it was Huang Hua, his genius student. Brando finally woke up. All the illusions in front of him disappeared. He saw that Huang Hua and Alaz were fighting with some people. Those people were Fu Luofa's subordinates. He saw Miss Silver Dragon. Her conspicuous black hair was flying in the air. He saw Fang Qi. He was being carried by a tall blue dragon. When he saw this, Brando completely recovered. The holy sword Odorfice appeared in his hand. However, the blue dragon reacted quickly and dodged his flash strike sword art. But it didn't matter. It was just Brando's afterimage that attacked. His body had already moved in another direction. The curved and deformed blade in his hand pointed straight at the blue dragon. The other party cursed angrily. Once again, it brushed past Brando's sword. But it did not dare to be careless anymore. It immediately flew back and muttered something in its mouth, intending to cast a string magic. Brando saw an arc of light appear in front of it. It was probably a shield-type spell. But he did not make another move. The blue dragon raised its head strangely. It heard the captive in its hand roar at it contemptuously in Draconic, "You're dead, idiot." Then, it was shocked to see that its chest was torn open. In the last sight of the blue dragon, it clearly saw its intact shield spell. It was like a silent taunt, mercilessly mocking its stupidity. Not far away, Fu Luofa watched her companion's head separated from its body. But she only looked at the human captive indifferently for a moment. It was useless. After thinking about this, Fu Luofa turned around and flew down to the city below. Her companions were at a loss. But obviously, Miss Silver Dragon was their leader. After hesitating for a moment, the rest of the dragons could only leave unwillingly. Fang Qi gasped for air. Brando's swordsmanship had been shown to him more than once. When the former taught Huang Hua fighting skills, he often overestimated himself and wanted to challenge him. Then, the former's terrifying swordsmanship would be reflected on him. He could not resist at all. This was the conclusion that Fang Qi came to after being beaten so many times. After that, he no longer considered himself a genius. The mistake made by the blue dragon was just a repeat of the scene in his second battle. The so-called Golden Clan did not handle it much better than him. In fact, in that battle, this was not the most fatal mistake for him. However, the giant reptile was killed before it could even react. Fang Qi finally regained some of his dignity as a genius from these enemies. He once thought that Brando's swordsmanship was the most unaesthetic and the most despicable swordsmanship in the world. But now, he found that he began to appreciate it. Did you see that the big reptile's dumbfounded expression at the end? It was like a complete idiot. Fang Qi resisted the urge to say those words to Brendel, who had come to receive him. Because at the last moment, he suddenly thought that he might be the same at that time. This was simply too humiliating. This genius of Ghost Chariot suddenly felt his face was a little hot. For the first time, he felt that he was a teenager in the late stage of Chinibu, and Brando was more like a mature and steady adult in front of him. Thank you. Brando looked at this guy with some surprise, wondering if he had taken the wrong medicine. But when he saw Fang Chi looking at him with some gratitude, he was sure that this guy must have been scared out of his wits. After the dragons left the battlefield, Phoenix Flame and the Laws also returned to Brando's side. The little female dragon chased after Flora for some distance, but could not catch up. The silver dragon was second only to the blue dragon in terms of speed. The latter was known as the Sky Dragon. It was said that part of its bloodline was of the wind elemental race, and was a distant relative of the wind dragon of the Mountain of Stopped Storms. In terms of flying skills, no one could beat it. Alaz had now returned to her dragon form. It was the first time Brando saw her graceful dragon form. Whether by human or dragon standards, she was a beautiful dragon. However, the little female dragon seemed to be a little angry. She did not allow Brando to look at her, and threatened that if Brando dared to look at her more than twice, she would gouge out his eyeballs and feed them to the pigs. The little female dragon's fierce look was quite intimidating, although Brendel didn't understand why he couldn't see it. Besides, the sisters Ling and Lien were sitting on her back, and they had already seen everything that should be seen. Alaz also did not allow Delphian to sit on her back, so now the Prime Minister's daughter was sitting on Magadol's strange diamond-shaped metal object. When it was not moving, it was very stable. Teacher. Ever since Alaz reverted to her dragon form, she had become incoherent and could not say anything useful. So Phoenix Hua took over her task of reporting to the battlefield. Miss Farofa and the others seemed to be heading towards the tower below. Should we go after them? Chapter 14-13. Everyone turned their attention to the city below. Brando could clearly see the outline of the city, but in the eyes of the others, this strange ruin did not necessarily look like a city. Because it was too different from the city that most of them knew. It had neither walls nor moats. It did not even have any defensive facilities or clear borders. What's more, its scale was too huge. It was so huge that it exceeded the limits of everyone's imagination. Especially in Princess Magadol's eyes, it looked more like a grand temple, or perhaps the kingdom of the gods, the legendary pantheon. When everyone was silent, Mr. Liu added, Akenta doesn't seem to have appeared either. Oh right, Fang Chi seemed to have remembered something, the demon's seal has been lifted. You have to be careful. Its power at its peak is not to be underestimated. It doesn't seem like it wants to let us go so easily. Although everyone had already expected this, but now that it was confirmed, they could not help but be speechless. But why didn't the Demon Lord stop us here? Lotus had some doubts. It knew that we would definitely appear here, didn't it? This means that dealing with us may only be its secondary goal. Brando silently glanced at the city below. Its goal may be the same as Miss Furofa's, or it may think that we can't escape. After all, it has just lifted the seal and needs some time to familiarize with its restored power. Maybe it's both, Allah said in a childish voice. It seemed that after turning into a dragon, her voice had become even more childish, even though she had already undergone the rite of adulthood. Demons are a bunch of arrogant fellows. That's the only fact that we don't hate these fellows who reek of sulfur. It's normal for them to have some presumptuous thoughts sometimes. Brando thought that it was no wonder that the dragons would think this way, because in the eyes of mortals, dragons were also a bunch of arrogant fellows. It was said that during the era of the Four Sages, they reduced the number of times they appeared in the human world, because they did not want to bow down to humans. Alaz obviously did not know that this stinking human was secretly criticizing her in his mind. She looked at Brando with her golden eyes and said, So, hurry up and make a decision, or Furofa and the others will be far away. Brando nodded and said, Let's go down too. Is the answer to the mystery below? Lotus laid on the back of the golden dragon and stared at the huge city, a faint fear of the unknown in her heart. Probably, replied her sister, as if she were not much interested in the subject. I can feel the call of the heart of the Jade Phoenix. Phoenixwood took a deep breath. I can feel it, it's below. She turned back and looked at Fong Qi. Yes, I can feel it too, Fong Qi said after a moment of silence. It should be our inheritance and the inheritance of the White Raven Sword Arte. Unfortunately, the real inheritance of the White Raven Sword Arte has been destroyed by the Nine Phoenix. The Baifong's bloodline is not some random descendant, they are the true inheritors of the White Raven Sword Art. Phoenixwa frowned and replied. So what, they even banished the inheritor of the White Raven Sword Art. From that generation, the Baifong's bloodline no longer has any true inheritance. That's because he participated in the rebellion, right? It's meaningless to discuss this from a different standpoint, Fong Qi. Phoenixwa replied calmly. The Jade Phoenix's bloodline is just following the heavenly axiom, history will judge everything. What is the heavenly axiom? The heavenly axiom is the people's will, Fong Qi. Fong Qi snorted softly and did not say anything else. Brando naturally heard the argument between the two, but he did not intend to intervene. This was the Nine Phoenix's own business, and it was not up to outsiders to criticize. The others were obviously even less interested. Lotus and Delphian were arguing about what the city below was. The little girl stubbornly believed that it was an ancient ruin, perhaps a holy temple or something similar. The Prime Minister's daughter, on the other hand, pointed out the nature of the city. She believed that the city had many distinct functional areas, and it was obviously a settlement of a civilization. This understanding restored the original identity of a city. The Prime Minister's daughter was unusually talkative. She seemed to be intentionally or unintentionally trying to arouse Magadol's interest in the discussion, so as to distract the Nun Princess's attention. Unfortunately, ever since the Nun Princess entered this world, she seemed to be a little restless. Mr. Brando, she finally could not help but say, I have a feeling that I might have been here before, but I don't have any memories of this place. I don't know if it's just my imagination. Brando looked at her, and he too had a lot on his mind. He was even more worried than the Nun Princess. The appearance of this city had cast a shadow over his heart. But at this moment, as the leader, he felt that it was necessary for his team to relax. It's normal. Andrea told us that this place could be part of the Silver Plains. You were born here, so it's normal for you to have memories of this place. Magadol looked at Brando's eyes uneasily. She seemed to have gained courage from her captain's calm brown eyes. She took a deep breath and calmed down. After all, Brando and the rest could not fly as fast as the dragons. Although he could easily catch up with Flora and the others, the rest of the team did not have the ability to do so. Hence, the team's speed was not fast, and it took about half an hour before they slowly approached the ground. When they were a few hundred meters from the ground, Brando could feel the city's anti-air system. To his surprise, the anti-air system was still working. Even in this dead world, the city's defensive system seemed to be working in an orderly manner. However, the only thing that was still in operation was the no-fly domain. That was a very ancient way of setting up magic, even older than the runic magic of the witches. Needless to say, it was completely incompatible with the structure of modern magic. The biggest difference between ancient magic and modern magic was the way in which dark magic was used. Brando could clearly feel that the laws of this place strictly followed some kind of law, enslaving the dark magic in a way that he had never heard of before, and forming such a large-scale anti-air zone. This scale of anti-air zone was almost impossible to exist in Won's era. Only miraculous ancient magic could reproduce this. However, it wasn't flawless. The tighter the law's control over the dark magic, the greater the feedback from the void. Brando could not imagine how powerful the chaos and dusk, as well as the monsters in the wild, were in that era. It was no wonder that in the description of the ancient era, the war between the gods and the dusk was so destructive. And there was a big problem with ancient magic, which was that it was too crude. The dark magic was almost unfiltered and absorbed by the law of Tiamat, causing many magic users to go crazy and even fall into darkness. He knew that the ancestors of the Senia were cursed because of using ancient magic, and the witches were another example. It was not until after the Fourth War that the law of Tiamat changed, and the Bugas invented a new magic system. Then, Tumen further improved on this system, so that the law could be used by mortals, and formed a more advanced and sophisticated modern magic system. Walking in this dusty and dead city, silently feeling the magic in the orbit of the law in a way that he had never experienced before, Brando could not help but have an illusion. It was as if history and the present time were intersecting at this moment, and the stagnant time had been given a new meaning. He looked back at the others, but was disappointed to find that no one else seemed to have the same feeling as him. This is ancient magic. Alaz was a little surprised. There is a complete ancient magic preserved here. If that's the case, this place is really a treasure trove. Many of the knowledge and theories of ancient magic have been lost in our world for a long time. If they can be rediscovered, it will lead to a huge improvement in the modern magic system. That's not all. The nun princess seemed to be familiar with this as well. Ancient magic contains a lot of knowledge from that era. Most of this knowledge has been lost since long ago. Although it may not be completely applicable to us, it can be used to answer many questions that we don't understand now. Scholars who unearth these fragments from the ruins of history have often reaped great rewards, but they are obviously far inferior to this place. This is really a place of miracles. Lotus could not help but praise. I never thought that the wound of the past would be preserved in this stagnant world in such a way. This must be the masterpiece of Lady Martha. This may not be the wound. When Brando heard this sentence suddenly appeared in his mind. Everyone finally landed in the middle of a strange building. These buildings were not similar to the architectural style of any area in Wound. They were neither simple and crude like the human cities, nor were they full of fantasy and romanticism like the Silver Folk. They were not grand like the Dragon cities, nor were they delicate and simple like the Elven or Dwarf cities. Chapter 14:14. Princess Magadol, Huanghua, Fang Qi, and even the Prime Minister's daughter looked strange in the eyes of the natives of Wound. The buildings were simple, but they often had complex geometrical shapes, and the surface material was either metal, crystal, or glass. Most of the metal pillars and frames were scorched black and showed signs of melting. Glass and crystals were scattered all over the ground, and the roads in the city were covered in dust, forming a grey world. It was as if the grey sword Saint Mephistopheles had unfolded. But if the buildings were extravagant, they were simple. They did not have the complex and varied lines of the human religious buildings, nor did they have pointed vaults or complicated decorations. They did not have the elves' hollow courtyards, complicated arched windows, pavilions, and gardens. They also did not have the dazzling pillars, stone statues, and carvings of the dwarves. These buildings were simply geometrical shapes and varied planes, simple and powerful, but not lacking in imagination. Everyone was stunned, as if they had come to a different world. They did not even notice that their leaders seemed to be very familiar with this place. Princess Magadol was studying the ground. The ground was also paved with metal. She gently rubbed it with her finger, and the dull light on the metal became brighter. Mithril! She exclaimed, her eyes filled with shock and disbelief. This discovery caused a stir among the others, because the entire street, or more accurately, most of the buildings in the city, were paved with the same metal. A city built with mithril. Everyone's eyes were filled with shock, and of course, there were a few who had a fanatical look in their eyes. Among them were Ling and the little female dragon Alaz. The elder half-elf sister seemed to have come alive at this time. She whispered to her sister, "Is this really mithril, the kind of metal that is very valuable?" "Sister," Lotus was a little embarrassed by her sister's greedy behavior. "Everyone is watching." Besides, with so much mithril, if we bring it back to our world, it will cause the price of mithril to fluctuate. It may not be as valuable as we think. What do you know? The former snorted. Without money, how are we going to return to Erewhon and continue to look for Mother? There is so much mithril here, it won't matter if we take some. As for the price fluctuations, it doesn't matter, we just have to get rid of them before that happens. Brando heard the conversation between the two sisters. It was not that he wanted to eavesdrop, but the two sisters' voices were too loud. He could not help but be surprised by Ling's professional vocabulary. It seemed like this was not the first time the little girl had done such a thing. But when he turned back to look at the latter, the little girl immediately shut her mouth, and showed an indifferent expression. But compared to the reserved sisters, Alaz was apparently in a state of fanaticism. So much. Brendel heard her gasp in surprise. She quickly ran to the side and used her teeth to bite the metal pillar. From what he could see, it was a lamp post. This is not mithril. The little female dragon screamed, this is not mithril at all. As a wealth collector, the appraisal of the dragon race, especially the female dragon, caused a commotion. How can it be? Princess Magadal was not surprised, such a light metal, so hard, and with such good magic conductivity and luminosity, this is obviously mithril. This is not mithril. Alaz was so sad that she was about to cry. Mithril is sweet, this thing doesn't taste right. Brendel, who was observing a building in the distance, almost vomited blood when he heard the little female dragon's words. He thought to himself that this was how the dragon race appraised metals. He could totally imagine that for the dragon race, the higher the value of the metal, the more delicious it would be. So gold was probably chocolate-flavored. But he had already recognized the identity of this metal. It was titanium alloy. The whole city used a large number of titanium alloy structures, including the paving of the ground. It was obviously not as simple as a city. Brando had a vague feeling that this thing was more like a fortress. It was too advanced. It was far beyond what he knew of that era. He looked up and stared at the gray sky, but it was as if he saw the bright stars of Wonde on a summer night in the mountains of Bucci. That night, he stared at the boundless night sky in the same way and asked himself, what is this? Why did he come to this place? Was it a mission given to him by the unseen world? That made him want to save the country of Erewhon. And at this moment, the answer to this question seemed to be extended to multiple meanings. He had a vague feeling that everything he had been searching for might be answered in this city. He could not help but think, maybe it was not a coincidence that he came here, but a choice in the unseen world. But the question was, who chose him? While Brando was silent, Princess Magadal was obviously interested in the various symbols that appeared on the ground. As a representative public figure of the Holy Cathedral of Fire, she had been to many states under Cruz's rule, including Erewhon, and even the small cities in Silver Bay. There was no street in any place that was so novel to her. There were all kinds of symbols drawn on the streets. What was the purpose of them? Were they religious symbols? Or was it just an artistic painting? But she saw many repetitive patterns, which made her doubt her judgment. The princess looked up and saw Brando walking through a street with ease. She could not help but ask, Mr. Brando, what is the purpose of these symbols? Brendel was thinking about his own problem when he heard Magadal's question. He turned around to look at the direction she was pointing at and answered subconsciously, that's the right-hand lane. What about this? Zebra crossing. Zebra crossing. Brando suddenly reacted, Probably, I just said it casually. Mr. Brando, I'm sorry, I just felt that the atmosphere was too tense and wanted to make a joke. Faced with Princess Magadal's questioning look, Brando could not help but laugh. It was as if coming to this place, the other half of his soul began to come alive. He was also caught off guard when something like that happened. Princess Magadal was stunned. Although she felt that Brando's words were suspicious, she could not find any fault with it. She could not help but think that maybe she was thinking too much. Indeed, the atmosphere here was oppressive, and she could not help but feel suspicious. It was not easy to avoid the nun princess's questioning. Brando finally breathed a sigh of relief. But when he turned back, he saw Alaz, who had returned to her human form, looking at him with a treacherous look. What? This is the fortress of the Silver Plains. It is said to be the birthplace of the Rune Dwarves. All knowledge about this place is a secret, even the dragons and Bugas have lost information about it. How did you know about it, stinky human? The little female dragon was still holding half of the lamp post in her hand, and said with a proud tone, "Did you find it in some mage's pile of papers?" I said, it was just a casual remark. Brando replied in a huff, "What are you doing with that lamp post? Are you planning to use it as a weapon?" "This is a lamp post." The little female dragon looked at him ambiguously. "I see, I just wanted to take it back to the dragons to see if it was valuable. Its physical properties are similar to mithril, and it also has a good magic conductivity. In theory, it should not be a simple metal. I just thought it looked like it." Hee, unnecessary explanation, stinky human. Shut up. Brando and Alaz continued to pester each other. Fortunately, the little female dragon did not seem to intend to continue on this topic, and was just proud of her own judgment. Not long after, Huang Hua and Fang Qi found the traces left behind by Fu Luofa and the others. It was a tall building, much taller and more majestic than any human building in Wonde. In fact, before seeing such a city, it was hard for others to believe that there was a place in the world where buildings could be built so tall and straight. Of course, some of them may have seen the World Tree of Valhalla, and the towering fortress was still fresh in their minds. However, compared to the mountain-like tower in the center of the city, the World Tree of Valhalla was nothing. And on the building discovered by Huang Hua, Brando saw the corpse of a giant dragon. The latter was in the form of a dragon crawling on the top of the building, with a huge spear on its back. The spear nailed it to the glass and titanium alloy structure of the building. Its head was tilted to one side, and it was obvious that it had been dead for a long time. This spear, Magadal stared at the dark red spear, and said solemnly, "This is the lava spear, the weapon of a high-grade demon. This is the first time I've seen it in real life. Strange, why would they fight with us?" "Don't underestimate the madness of a demon," Alaz replied, gritting her teeth. "It must be trying to take the spoils of war for itself, or to please the Twilight Dragon. Damn it, Fu Luofa is in danger." As she said that, she wanted to chase in that direction. But before she could do so, Brando pressed on her shoulder. "Wait, something's not right here." Brando looked around solemnly and warned in a low voice. Just as his voice trailed off, the quiet street was filled with a rustling sound, as if countless insects were crawling on the ground, surrounding them from all directions. Chapter 14-15. On the dark and deep street, the sudden sound of metal scraping on the ground made one's scalp tingle, especially when the sound was like dense raindrops hitting one's eardrums. Lotus suddenly screamed, "Look, what is that?" Brendel looked back and saw the girl with a pair of oversized glasses covering her mouth, pointing to a spot not far away with a horrified expression. There was a collapsed building in that direction. The huge metal structure was blown apart from the inside, and the metal wreckage and glass shards piled up like a mountain, covering a crossroad. The ruins were covered with dust, as if it had been buried in the long river of history. At this moment, countless beetle-like creatures were pouring out from the ruins, like a black stream, rushing towards them. These beetles were about the size of a football, and looked like coleoptera beetles. Their keratinized wings were covered with dark red veins, and a pair of compound eyes flashed with a dim red light in the dark. But the most eye-catching thing was their huge mouthparts, which were more than a foot long, like a pair of sharp blades. When they were discovered, hundreds of thousands of beetles spread their wings, and a sharp whistle sounded as if the air was ignited. A black wall suddenly rose up in front of everyone's eyes, and a black storm rained down on them. Beetle larvae. Alaz screamed. Brando stepped out from the crowd, and pointed the tip of his sword in the direction of the beetles. The tip of the sword shone with a dazzling light, and a layer of translucent hexagonal network fell from the sky. The beetles immediately hit the network like raindrops, and fell to the ground. He looked back, and shouted to everyone with a serious face, "Run!" Everyone looked around, and found that the disgusting creatures were everywhere, and their numbers were uncountable. The squeaking sound was the sound of the beetles crawling on the metal ground. "We are surrounded, Mr. Brando," Princess Magadol shouted anxiously. Brando took a deep breath, and felt guilty for his negligence. The city attracted too much of his attention, and he did not notice the threat close at hand. However, these horseshoe mites were not simply hiding. Otherwise, his darkness perception would have warned him long ago. He closed his eyes. Everyone heard a soft buzzing sound, and a layer of black ripples swept out in all directions with Brendel as the center. It was as if there was a visible airflow that made everyone's robes flutter. When Phoenix Fire turned around, her emerald eyes reflected the scene of thousands of locusts being swept away by the black ripples. The swarm of locusts formed a white ripple, and from afar, this ripple was spreading at a speed faster than the speed of sound from the front to the back of the swarm. Phoenix saw this scene, and her eyes were filled with horror. She murmured, "Calm ancient well, the realm of oneness of heaven and man. This is the materialization of the power of the soul. Teacher." She turned around and saw that Fong Chi was looking in that direction with admiration. The latter noticed her gaze and turned back, his dark eyes shining. "This is what I'm after, the ultimate power." "Me too." Phoenix clenched her fists. Brendel used darkness perception and Heaven's Eyes power to scan dozens of streets in an instant. Everything within a few kilometers seemed to be under his observation, and he saw everything. Then he understood the source of these horseshoe mites. The beetles did not appear out of thin air. Brando tilted his head. "Alaz, do you see the building over there?" His eyes fell on the building where the brimstone spear was. "I see it. Can you find a way to open a passage?" The little female dragon looked at the swarm and frowned. "Tisk, it's a little difficult. Miss Magadol, is it okay for you to do it?" "Me?" Magadol asked nervously. "Yes, you can try." "Then." "Okay, I'll try, Mr. Brando." Magadol sighed softly and stepped forward. She looked up. Although her face was still pale due to her nervousness, she looked at the beetles with a calm gaze. She held the Book of Gaia in her left hand and placed it across her right palm. The magic in the air became active, and dozens of beetles let out a sharp cry. They spread their wings and flew towards them like cannonballs. "Alaz, cover Miss Magadol." "I know." The little female dragon's eyes shone brightly. It was these damned insects that caused her and Flora to be separated. Now, she wanted them to pay a little compensation. She looked up, and gently opened her hands to the side. She took a deep breath, and even her small chest seemed to swell. Ah Luo opened her mouth wide, revealing her white fangs. Finally, she sneered at the bugs in front of her from the corner of her eye. It was as if she was looking at a pile of corpses. What followed was a roar from the vast expanse. Roar, the dragon's roar swept across, and the harsh sound waves caused the lines of law in her field of vision to vibrate at a frequency visible to the naked eye. Silver lines spread out in all directions, and as they vibrated, they formed sharp peaks and valleys. Wherever they passed, the wind howled, and sparks flew from the metal floor. The fire borrowed the strength of the wind, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into a sea of fire, engulfing the beetles that flew towards them. Alaz opened her mouth wide, and an endless roar burst out from her small chest, forming a storm in the blink of an eye. The horseshoe beetles lowered their bodies under this terrible power, hooking their 6 legs tightly to the ground, as if the slightest mistake would blow them away. At this time, Magadal's right palm drew a 120-degree arc in the air, and finally landed gently in front of her. It was a blade. Countless silver lines flashed in the air. With a loud bang, half of the street seemed to have been sunk by this blade. The streets on both sides collapsed towards the center, and the low, deep sound of metal breaking echoed in the air. Thousands of locusts were reduced to ashes by this attack. Everyone was dumbfounded. Although Magadal had shown greater power on the previous battlefield, but in the smoke-filled battlefield, it was not as direct as this scene. Andrea had claimed more than once that Magadal was the 13th daughter of Gaia, a real titan. And at this moment, they finally believed that this elegant and cultured princess was a descendant of the titans. This power. Lotus could not help but widen her eyes, and gasped, "Miss Magadal is also so powerful." "That is not Miss Magadal's power." Phoenix Flame shook her head gently, and looked up at the city with some respect. "This is the power of Tiamat." The little female dragon finally stopped roaring. She replied excitedly, "This is the battle style of the divine people. After tens of thousands of years, there is finally someone who can fully display the power of Lady Martha again. Although it's not complete, it already has the grandeur of the past. I've finally seen it. This is a power that even Lady Owenlos and the previous king have never seen before. It's the network of the divine people." Network. Legend has it that with the help of Lady Martha, the divine people weaved a large net in this world. Everything comes from this original network. That is the first generation of the net of law, that is the source of the divine people's power. In this network, anyone can become a god. They are omnipotent. But they still can't defeat the Twilight Dragon, right? Lotus looked up at the dragon girl who was only half a head taller than her. "Yes, but can we defeat the Twilight Dragon?" Alaz could not help but look confused. Her gaze involuntarily fell on Brendel, who was not far away. Brando pointed at the building not far away and shouted to everyone, "Leave this place immediately, go inside, quick, now, save time. Where did these beetles come from?" The little fairy lute flew to Brendel's side during the evacuation and asked. "They were brought in from the outside. I just saw a few craters, and they all came from the nearby tunnels. Obviously, there were eggs that fell into those places." Brando pointed to the sky. "They came from there." "Who brought them, Akentu?" "It is possible, but it is more likely that they were originally sealed together with Akentu, and when the seal was broken, they came to this world." "How is that possible?" Lute shouted in surprise. "There is such a possibility, if these insects were together with the demons, and were an advance army. When they tried to invade the stagnation realm, they were ambushed by the ancestors of the Bugis, and as a result, were forever sealed outside the stagnation realm, until today, when they saw the light of day again." Brando maintained the wall of law behind him, while looking at the possible threats on both sides of the street. Magadal's attack just now almost eliminated all the threats in this direction. In that case, why didn't the ancestors of the Bugis kill them in one fell swoop? Why did they make such a troublesome and dangerous thing like sealing them? Lute was puzzled. Could it be that they didn't foresee the situation today? Of course they could foresee it, but what if they had to do it? For example, it was beyond their ability, or, at that time, the ancestors of the Bugis did not have enough time to complete all of this. Chapter 14-16. No time. At the most crucial moment of the war, they don't have the time to stay here, Brando replied in a low voice as the pieces of the puzzle in his mind became clearer and more complete. Perhaps there is another more important battle that they need to participate in. That is, Brendel shook his head and did not say anything. He still lacked some crucial evidence in his mind, and before that, he did not want to discuss too many guesses. That would only lead to subjective misunderstandings of his and the others' judgment. At this time, the two of them passed by the nun princess who was panting slightly. Brando could not help but encourage her. "Well done, Miss Magadol. You have saved all of us once." Magadol was at a loss as she tidied up her skirt. Her hands were still trembling slightly as the continuous battles had taken a toll on her. However, her pale face could not help but reveal a trace of surprise. "Really?" "Of course." Alaz proudly gave her a thumbs up. The nun princess was finally relieved as she placed her hand on her chest and quietly let out a sigh of relief. The group followed the path that Magadol had opened up, and it did not take long for them to pass through the broken and smoke-filled streets and enter the building. The swarm of insects quickly followed, but the nun princess used the Book of Gaia to raise the street level and blocked the entrance, temporarily blocking the insects from entering. The surroundings darkened, and even the rustling sounds outside became soft. The group felt that they had walked into an empty and dark hole. The entire space was silent in the darkness. Brando chanted, "Flame." A ball of flame rose from his hand, and the flickering light reflected a spacious, empty, and dusty world. Not far away was a platform, and on the dusty metal surface was a huge crystal plate with complicated lines and patterns. Brando raised the ball of flame in his hand and lit up every corner of the crystal plate. He looked up and carefully observed the complicated lines and patterns on the plate. "What is this?" Alaz asked. "A map." "A map?" "It's about the map of this area," Brando replied. "I think I understand why Flora and Akenta came here." "You can understand it?" The little female dragon looked at Brando in surprise. Brando shook his head. There were two ancient characters on it. He had never seen them before, but he seemed to be able to recognize their meaning at a glance. This was a classic case of self-awakening. Such a phenomenon would only occur when a bloodline was passed down, such as the giant dragons. Mortals had to acquire knowledge through learning. However, Brando's family history wasn't complicated. Although his grandfather was powerful, he was still a pure Erewhon. His grandmother's background was similar to his mother's, both of them were nobles of Koliga. His father was also of Highlander blood, and so was he. His grandfather had a few brothers and sisters, but there were no abnormalities in their descendants. His father had never heard of such a thing. Moreover, if the bloodline inheritance could not be purified, it would disappear within a few generations. Therefore, there was no point in investigating the history of the family for a longer period of time. Another possibility was that he had lost a certain memory. In that lost memory, he might have come to this place and systematically learned these two languages. But this was unlikely. The time didn't match. Brando's identity was only 22 years old today. "This is a layout map of magic transmission," he replied. "The black tower we saw outside is the center of this city. It controls the magic of the entire city and transmits magic to all parts of the city through relay stations. This is one of the relay stations. So Akenta must want to get a map of this area from here. What is it looking for?" "A laboratory." Brando's gaze fell on the upper right corner of the crystal plate, where 3 letters were marked, R-T-U. There were obvious traces of dust being wiped away. When Magadol saw the letters, her body shook visibly. Delphian quickly supported her. "Is that where Miss Magadol was born?" The others had obviously heard about the history of the 13 Titans from Andrea. Phoenix glanced at the crystal plate and asked, What? Sister Magadol was born in this place. But this was the first time Lotus knew of this secret. She couldn't help but widen her eyes behind her thick glasses. Then she's not a resident here. That was a story from a long time ago, little one, Fang Qi replied. That lady is not as simple as she seems. The two little girls remembered the power that the nun princess displayed and couldn't help but look at her in awe. They obediently kept quiet. The devils are looking for the secret of the creators. Alaz asked in surprise. The creators used the planeswalker system to create substitutes. Perhaps the Twilight Dragon wanted to find the source of the planeswalker's power. The Twilight Dragon claimed that it wanted to completely grasp the secrets of our world. Since Wond was created for the divine people, the power of the planeswalkers might be the source of this world, Brando replied. I'm afraid that may not be the case, my lord. Delphine, who had been silent all this while, finally spoke. I remember Andrea saying that the demons have invaded the Silver Plains more than once. In several wars, the Silver Plains was even torn apart because of this. The 12 titans died one after another, and Princess Magadol, the last creator, was also left behind in Vaunt. During this process, the minions of the Twilight Dragon had plenty of opportunities to get close to the creators. Moreover, in the Moon's channel, Akentis should have recognized Miss Magadol's identity. But after it escaped, it didn't attack us immediately. Instead, it went to Miss Flofa and the others. What does this mean? It means that Akenta didn't care about the creators, even if Magadol was the 13th creator. His goal was the 17th laboratory itself, or the secret that still exists in the laboratory. Brando looked at the scratches on the crystal plate and revealed a look of understanding. And the landing point of the nightmare worm eggs was nearby, which means that Akenta's landing point wasn't too far away. Since it clashed with the dragons here, it means that Miss Flofa and the others weren't slow. This means that Akentu and the dragons came here one after another. Obviously, they are more familiar with this place than we are, and they know where their destination is. From this point of view, we are far behind them. We still have no clue what we are looking for. Then what should we do? Alaz asked. Should we stop them? Of course we have to stop them. If the secret that the Twilight Dragon is so eager to find is related to the survival of our world, Magadol replied firmly. Otherwise, even if Mr. Brando finds the orb of nature, what's the point? The others were silent for a moment. They had to agree that this opinion was hard to ignore. But those worms have already surrounded this place, not to mention that they left before us, Phoenix asked. Can we still make it in time? Yes. Brendel's answer was resolute and decisive. The others couldn't help but look at him curiously, not understanding where Brando's confidence came from. Brendel replied faintly, that's right. Akenta may know very well where his destination is and how he should get there. But it will never understand what the legacy of civilization is. Under the puzzled gazes of the others, Brando silently came to the side of the crystal plate. He gently rubbed the center of the plate with his hand and drew a small mark there. Underground Transmission Tunnel, Number 14 Magic Relay Center Transmission Station. With a loud bang, the alloy door that was half a meter thick was smashed open by the huge impact and twisted into a ball. 3 panicked figures entered the door one after another and arrived at the underground space behind the door. One of them couldn't help but kneel on the ground after 2 steps and coughed heavily. She turned around with a pale face. She pressed one hand on her chest, and golden blood kept oozing out from between her fingers. Drops of blood dripped onto the ground and shone in the darkness, forming a pearl-like trail of light. She was also injured, but she still didn't say a word. She only looked at her companions with a cold face. The silver dragon shook its head weakly, indicating that it couldn't walk anymore and that they should leave quickly. She frowned and was about to speak, but at this moment, her expression suddenly changed and she subconsciously took 2 steps back. A huge claw appeared on the alloy door. The claw tore the door left and right like a piece of paper, tearing the door to shreds. The alloy door let out a low whimper and completely split into two. Then, it was casually thrown aside like trash and fell heavily on the ground. Behind the giant door, the figure of a tall demon appeared. Akenta arrogantly looked at the three remaining dragons and slowly walked into the underground space. Not running anymore. It opened its mouth and sneered, revealing its white fangs. Akentu. Despair flashed in Furofa's eyes. She let out an angry roar and rushed toward the Lord of Purgatory. Chapter 14-17. Akenta's eyes showed a look of indifference. It pointed at Fu Luofa with its right index finger. Fu Luofa suddenly let out a cry and fell from the air. She fell heavily on the ground and could no longer get up. Akenta then pointed at the remaining dragon. The dragon screamed and flew backward, hitting a metal pillar not far away. Akenta looked down at the three defeated soldiers with a sneer on its face. Akenta, Fu Luofa lay on the ground with her face covered in blood. She gently breathed, but her expression did not change. Only her voice was as cold as ice. You have killed many of my companions. Do you really want to fight to the death with us, even at the expense of affecting Master's plan? Don't forget that we have a common enemy. They have also entered this world. Akenta raised its head and its horns high, looking a little arrogant. In its view, this cat and mouse game was just revenge for the damn reptiles' disrespect to it at the beginning. It felt that it was necessary to let these reptiles know who was the most capable assistant of its master, and not the unreliable traitors who had temporarily turned to its master. It did not immediately answer Fu Luofa's question. Instead, it silently looked around the underground space. Demons could easily see through the darkness and capture even the faintest light in the darkness. In its view, this dark underground space was as bright as noon. This was an open hall, but it looked more like a workshop. There were rows of metal platforms in the hall, and further away, there was a row of metal culture tanks. There were a total of 12. In the position of the 13th, the metal culture tank that was originally placed there had been removed and was empty. Akenta raised its head and looked at the ceiling in the center of the hall. There was a huge symbol of the Twilight and Order dragon surrounding Woned. It was the symbol of the Gaia organization. After seeing this, it lowered its head and looked at Fu Luofa and the others again. Little girl, are you afraid? Akenta said in a triumphant tone. Previously, you just paid the price for your rudeness. I just want you to understand that necessary courtesy is very important, especially in front of a true powerhouse. It may save your life, but of course, it may also take your life, just like now. Fu Luofa's face was dark, but she did not say a word. She knew that this time she had failed. In the face of absolute strength, any strategy would not work. Not to mention, when it came to conspiracy, they might not be the opponent of this cunning demon in front of them. As for Fu Luofa's previous threat, Akenta seemed to be somewhat disdainful. Common enemy? You mean those pitiful humans outside? I'm afraid that they are still struggling in the sea of reptiles. Ha, I hope that they can live longer, after all, I still have a debt to settle with them. Fu Luofa's voice. Fu Luofa. You will regret it, Fu Luofa said indifferently. Her words seemed to have affected her wound, making her cough lightly. Akenta nodded. There is a 13th Titan beside that human. Perhaps he is indeed a unique little guy. But so what? The greater demon opened its hand and said loudly. Everything is in my plan. I have been waiting for this moment for thousands of years. Now, Master's great plan will be completed by me. And you, Akenta looked down at Fu Luofa and the other two and sneered. You are lucky enough to witness how I complete all of this. Your foolish loyalty is not worth mentioning compared to it. Do you really think that Master sent you to complete this plan? Master only sent me the key to open the door. As keys, you should learn to be self-aware after completing your mission. It's a pity. It shook its head and sighed. You are too stupid. You don't understand the subtle meaning of wisdom. As it said that, the greater demon slowly walked to the center of the hall. Fu Luofa frowned. Just as she was puzzled by its strange actions, the greater demon raised its chin and shouted. Come out, Gaia. I know you are here. The so-called Mother Earth, how long do you want to hide? Are you waiting for me to completely raze this place to the ground? The Lord of Purgatory's arrogant roar reverberated in the hall. Fu Luofa and the others couldn't help but frown. Suddenly, the hall became slightly brighter. A gentle voice sounded from the darkness. Akentu, we meet again. After 10,000 years, 234 days, 17 hours, 23 minutes, and 55 seconds, I noticed that your body's functions have declined a lot. This means that the power of the demons is gradually fading. As I expected, the power of dusk is declining due to the deterioration of the world's power level. Akenta narrowed his eyes and looked at the light that suddenly rose in the center of the hall. It was a pure ball of light. In the center of the ball of light, a gentle stream of light flowed like a stream of water. It was like a ray of light that was born in ancient times. Everyone in the hall, including Fu Luofa, couldn't help but be shocked. The mission given to them by their master was to bring back the core secret of Stagnation Realm. Just as Akenta said, they only knew that the secret was buried under the laboratory, but no one knew that there was a god here. Mother Earth, Gaia. Don't pretend to be mysterious, Akenta snorted. I'm not here to talk nonsense with you, Gaia. Perhaps your plan was very precise, and the attack of the Bugas that day was completely beyond our expectations. But unfortunately, all was for naught. You ultimately failed. Thousands of years later, I still came here. You may not have expected it, but it was the mortals that you placed high hopes on that helped me complete all of this. It was my mortal servants who opened the channel of the moons, and another group of mortals who unlocked my seal. So, do you feel that fate is playing you? Akentu, it's meaningless. No matter how much you do, you can't redeem all of this. With the advent of the mortal era, the defeat of the Dusk Dragon is inevitable. This war that has lasted for 6 eras will completely end here. I can't see that those pathetic vermin have the ability to do so. Akenta grinned ferociously. On the contrary, the Great Master has obtained the only pure-blooded ancestor. You have even lost the user of the key. And I'm here to completely cut off all hope for you. Perhaps you're right about one thing, Gaia. The Lord of Purgatory's face was full of fanaticism. The War of 6 Eras will completely end here. This time, you can no longer escape the judgment of the Master by rebooting this world. So now tell me, where is the Throne of Destiny? The light ball flickered for a moment. Do you really want to see the Throne of Destiny, Akentu? The gentle voice said. Perhaps when you see the ultimate face of this plan, it will be too late for you to regret. Akenta let out a long laugh. Are these your empty threats, Gaia? How laughable. When did Martha and her gods fall to such a state? Do you think I'll retreat? I can't think of anything here that can stop me. Is it the gods or the titans? I won't stop you, Akentu. You'll see it soon. The Lord of Purgatory was slightly stunned. He knew that Martha's Tiamat code had an unprecedented highest authority behind it. This authority had only been used a few times in the past eras, but each time, it had allowed this world to escape the final fate of the Twilight. In the 5th and 6th War, the Twilight Dragon had not hesitated to project its true body into this world in order to steal this highest authority itself. This authority was so important, whether it was to its great master or the gods of Wonde, because at this moment, it was almost the final hammer that determined the final outcome of this war. But why was the other party so indifferent about it? At that moment, Akente had a moment of hesitation. But he quickly threw this hesitation to the back of his mind. At this critical moment, he would never retreat because of a little bit of empty threats, and the great existence behind him would never allow it. Thinking of this, the Lord of Purgatory quickly became cold and resolute. Its scarlet-red eyes turned back to yellow, and a cruel and cunning light flickered in its eyes as it coldly replied, "Yes, Lord of Purgatory." He said coldly, "I hope you're not stupid enough to play any tricks, Gaia. What is this place?" Just as Allah suspected that this underground tunnel that seemed to extend infinitely in both directions had no end, the light of the flame in Brando's hand suddenly spread out along the walls on both sides of the tunnel to the left and right, and finally formed a huge underground hole. Allah was very familiar with the structure of this hole. Because when they were underground in the magic relay station, they set off from such a hall, and then followed this underground tunnel full of metal tracks and pipes for almost a quarter of an hour before arriving at this place. The hall was very grand, and there were at least 7 or 8 tunnels intersecting here. The metal tracks overlapped with each other, but at the intersection, there seemed to be some kind of mechanism that could change the tracks. Almost everyone was curious about these things, but Delphian had seen magic cars in Hazel before. The Hazel people used magic-powered cars to transport or on the tracks, and that kind of track was almost the same as these metal tracks, but much shorter and narrower, and was usually only used in mines. Are we back to the starting point again? Seeing this scene, Feng Qi could not help but frown in doubt. Obviously not. The little female dragon observed very carefully. The furnishings on the platform are different, and there are many more converging tunnels here. I understand, the ground here must be similar to the previous magic relay station. Brando was very surprised by the little female dragon's ability to draw inferences. He looked at her with some surprise and replied, "That's a station, not a platform." He raised the flame in his hand and looked carefully at the sign in the hole. After seeing the words on it, he nodded. "We're here." Chapter 14:18. Mr. Brando, come and take a look at this. Magadal's voice came from the side. Brendel moved the flame in his hand towards that direction, and the light seemed to have a shape in the darkness. In the pale and narrow space, it reflected a huge door that was twisted to the side. Its alloy material was easily torn apart like paper. Brando saw the fresh claw marks on the door and knew that either Flora or Akenta had passed by here not long ago. Unless there was a third party, this meant that they had found the right place. Look at the ground. Huanghua pointed at the bloodstains on the ground. The dried bloodstains glittered like gold in the pale light. This is dragon blood. Alaz was anxious and wanted to rush behind the door. But Brendel grabbed her by the shoulder, pulled out the holy sword Odorfice with one hand, and walked in ahead of her. Behind the twisted alloy door was the underground hall where Akentu and Flora had a conflict not long ago. As soon as Brando entered the empty hall, he raised the flame in his hand and let the pale light spread in all directions. He only needed to look at the furnishings to know that they had entered the core area of the laboratory. His gaze fell on the metal culture tanks leaning against the wall, and then turned to look at Magadal behind him. The nun princess let out a low cry when she saw this scene. Her face turned pale, and her whole body swayed and fell backwards. If it was not for Brando who caught her in time, the Princess of Antoinette would have fallen to the ground. "Miss Magadal, what did you remember?" Brendel asked in a low voice. Magadal's lips trembled slightly. I think I have been here before. You're actually very afraid that what your grandfather said is true. Brendel let go of her hand. You don't believe what Andrea told you. In your heart, you still want to be the nun princess of Antiburo. That's all. You want to go back to those days, right? Magadal's face was a little pale. She placed her hand on her chest and lowered her head in pain. I'm scared, I'm really scared. Mr. Brendel, there's another me living in my heart. I'm so scared. If I remember my past, I'll lose everything. She suddenly covered her face and sobbed. Mr. Brando, I think I am so selfish. She gave me life, but I am so afraid of her. The sudden sound of a young girl crying in the darkness made everyone stop. Even Alaz, who was most anxious for her partner, could not help but stop and look at the nun princess. No one had ever seen the usually quiet and gentle princess cry so hysterically. Even Lotus and Huang Huo were at a loss for what to do with this sudden change. Brando also looked at her. Looking at this lady, he could not help but think of Marshal Brando's request. After all, he was Magadal's grandfather. Although he was only a figurehead, Marshal Brando was the only one who could see the confusion and avoidance in his granddaughter's heart. Perhaps he had already seen through it. Instead of letting this secret be buried in her heart forever, it would be better for her to face the truth. Perhaps it was a little cruel, but at least it would give her a chance to let go of the knot in her heart forever. Perhaps no one in this world would know what the nun princess saw on her last trip to the Silver Plains. Instead of trying to find an answer by beating around the bush, why not come to this world again? Andrea's suggestion was not without reason. Brando silently walked over and grabbed Princess Magadal's arm, taking her hand away from her face. She gave you life, and let you replace her, to complete her unfinished business. Perhaps she did not want you to appear so weak, Miss Magadal. Magadal raised her head and looked at him with tear-stained eyes. Brando looked at her eyes that were as clear as the sea, and comforted her gently. Don't be afraid, Miss Magadal. You are yourself. You will always hold on to your ideals, beliefs, and feelings. That's why it is so real. We will say that you are Princess Griffin's good friend, the nun princess of Antiburo. You are Marshal Brando's granddaughter, Magadal Antiburo Lopez. But is that important? Because no matter where you come from, no matter who you are, at this moment, you are with us, standing side by side. We will face the dangers and the future together. The symbol and meaning of our names and identities may not depend on who and what they are, but on who and what we mean to others. Others? Brando nodded, and then asked, So, our trusted friend, Miss Magadal, have you regained your courage? Magadal slowly blinked, her eyes were as bright and beautiful as crystals. She looked at the others in confusion. Lotus, who was not far away, adjusted her glasses that were about to fall off the bridge of her nose, and hurriedly raised her fist and said, Miss Magadal, Mr. Brando is right. You are the best. Have you forgotten about the battle just now? Actually, the most important thing is that you are the most charming. Fong Chi added. He glanced at the Prime Minister's daughter, and was kicked by Alaz. Magadal let out a sigh of relief. She looked at the rows of metal culture tanks on the wall. There were a total of 12 of them. This cold scene was so familiar to her, but at this moment, she no longer felt the suffocating fear. This is the place where I was born. She thought to herself, how nice. Being able to live in this world is such a great thing. Magadal quietly raised her head, and saw that Brando's gaze was still on her. She suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of panic. Brando did not have such complicated thoughts in his mind. He asked, Miss Magadal, do you remember everything about this place? Ah. Magadal hurriedly replied, Yes, Mr. Brando. The moment I entered here, many memories appeared in my mind. Is there anything that scares you? Magadal frowned, and she pressed her forehead and said, I remember that I have been to a similar place before, and I saw something. What? I don't know. I feel that my mind is in a mess, and I am very scared. I think, maybe, sheet is affecting me. You have been here before. After you were born, you found your own culture tank, and tried to remove a nameplate from it. Brando replied, in that adventure, you saw something. That encounter caused you to be seriously injured, and not long after you returned to Antoine, you died. After that, it is the history that we are familiar with. Then, what is here that is enough to threaten you? Have you been to this stagnant realm before? Miss Magadol, do you remember what happened in between? Brendel suddenly asked, not giving her any face. No. I didn't. Beads of sweat appeared on Magadol's forehead. She had just calmed down a little, but now she was starting to feel uneasy again. She replied nervously, I don't know. For a moment, I seem to remember something. What is it? Brando saw that Magadol's face had turned pale again. Her eyes widened, and her pupils dilated slightly due to uneasiness. Everyone else had already entered the hall, but Ling and Lotus were still beside Brando. The little girl saw this scene and was slightly puzzled. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but was stopped by Huanghua. Huanghua, Mr. Brando, Huanghua looked at Lotus and shook her head gently. Believe in Master. Princess Magadol clenched her fists. At this moment, Mr. Brando became a little detestable in her eyes. She clearly did not want to recall all of this, but the memories hidden in her heart were like an invisible hand, clutching her heart, suffocating her and making her feel as if she would die in the next moment. Her heart was thumping wildly. Did you see a black tower? But at this moment, Brando suddenly asked. The nun princess looked as if she was struck by lightning, and her mouth was wide open in shock. It was as if with Brando's words, countless memories trickled into her heart like a trickle, and those blurry memories suddenly became clear. But Brando did not care about the princess's reaction, and continued, You saw a ray of light, and that light predicted a future for you. The whole world fell into darkness, and a huge moon hung alone in the sky of the whole world. There was no light, no life, and everything was dead. You saw the back of the world, and there was a supreme authority, and there were many people, wearing purple and golden robes, and they passed by you. You saw a setting sun, and countless meteors falling from the sky. You see a tower falling from the clouds. Flames are burning fiercely, and there is only a dazzling green light shining in the clouds. You saw the dusk of the whole world, as if the prophecy of Won's destruction was right in front of you. Brando's voice softened. Am I right? Chapter 14:19. Boo. Boo. Mr. Brando, how did you know? Magadol looked at the man in front of her as if she had seen a ghost. She was so weak that she could faint at any moment. Brando did not speak. Perhaps all of this is not your imagination. After a while, he slowly opened his mouth and said, Perhaps it is your real experience. You have seen all of this with your own eyes, and it formed a memory that is buried in the depths of your heart. Perhaps, someone purposely buried all of this, boo. Mr. Brando, are you really the Dark Dragon? Princess Magadol was speechless for a long time. After a while, she asked in a daze, what the witches said is true. You are the one mentioned in the dark prophecy, the one who came to this world, the one who knows everything, the one who will destroy everything, and the one who will save the world. Brando let out a long sigh. I am not. He removed the flame on his palm, and replied faintly in the darkness, Miss Magadol, it is best for you to recall who attacked you. After saying that, Brando turned his gaze to the other side of the laboratory. The darkness couldn't obstruct his vision. His sharp heavenly eye ability and dark perception allowed him to see his surroundings clearly even without opening his eyes, regardless of the environment. The reason why he lit the flame was only to illuminate the others. On the other side of the laboratory, there was a door. Behind the door was the assembly workshop of the Titans. Glory of Thunderhole. Further back, there was the storm corridor. On both sides of the corridor, there was a corridor that led to the core of the laboratory. Each name was like a lamp in the darkness, lighting up in Brando's heart one by one. In the darkness, his thoughts were like a flood that broke through the dam, rushing forward uncontrollably. He realized that he had been here before. But the memory in his mind was blank. He did not remember when he came to this place, and under what circumstances. In the game. Definitely not. In the game, there was a player who obtained the mystery of the emerald, but that was from a lich who had entered the stagnant realm. Maybe there was someone, but it was definitely not him. He couldn't help but groan as he held his head in pain. Although he was trying to comfort Magadol, he was also feeling a deep sense of fear in his heart. Were the memories of his previous life real and complete? If even his memories were fake, then what else in this world was real? Was the environment he was in, the people around him, everything he had experienced, real? How could he be so sure? Brando couldn't help but clench his fists in secret, but he couldn't stop his mind from continuing to run wildly. This laboratory that he had never set foot in actually became strangely familiar in his eyes at this moment. He closed his eyes. His mind had already passed through the storm corridor. It was a passage full of metal pipes, and further ahead was a thick alloy door. The door was tightly shut. He had never seen such a door before, but at this moment, he realized that he recognized this door. Behind the door was the core area of the laboratory. He had never entered this area before, but he remembered that he was brought to this place by someone. That person even pointed behind the door and told him that one day, he would return here. It was as if at this moment, he really did return here. Brando felt his blood tremble a little, because he actually remembered clearly that the person who brought him here was a woman. She was called Gaia. This is the origin and end of everything, the answer to all questions. Sophie, one day, you will return here, but when that time comes, you will be the one to decide everything. You will be the one to decide everything, the gentle voice repeatedly echoed in Brando's mind. Alaz had already found a magic lamp. The lamp was placed on a metal platform. The little female dragon fiddled with it and found that the lamp could still be used. And at this moment, she felt that the surroundings had darkened. She knew that it was Brando dispelling the magic on his hand. Tisk, Alaz couldn't help but snort softly. She didn't expect Brando to be paying attention to her movements. While thinking of this, her hands did not slow down. She whispered a simple spell and was about to reactivate the magic circle on the magic lamp. In this brief moment of darkness, Yizichen's eyes lit up. Brando closed his eyes. He seemed to see countless scenes overlapping in front of him. His eyes seemed to become bright. It was a golden sea of clouds and heavy rays of sunlight. He lowered his head. Under his feet was a dark obsidian floor covered with a crystal lattice network used to transmit magic. He shook his head and looked up. He found a familiar scene in front of him. On the upper floor of a tower, outside the round hall were 12 black stone pillars. Outside the stone pillars, a golden sea of clouds floated up and down. Towering buildings stood among the sea of clouds, and in the distance, the Perkin sun emitted an eternal afterglow on the horizon. There were many tall and handsome humans standing in the room. They had black hair and golden eyes, and wore robes. The robes were red on the left and black on the right, with a dark golden collar at the collar. The robes were entwined with an Ouroboros. There were a total of 11 people. One of them stepped forward and reached out to touch his eyelids. The ring of coiled serpent on his index finger shone with a silver light. Brando subconsciously took a step back, but found that he couldn't control his body at all. Then he heard those people begin to whisper. But this time, the soundless mouth seemed to have become clearer, because Brendel was surprised to find out that he could hear the sound. It was an extremely ancient language, but he naturally understood the meaning. His physique is too weak. Is this really the first generation? There is no doubt that he is from that era. Another resolute voice interrupted everyone. In order to get this sample, Martha did not hesitate to disturb the law of causality. Alright, we don't have much time left. Let's vote. How do we confirm that he is trustworthy, this human called Sophie? Because he is one with us. But, in the next generation, will everything really go according to our wishes? You must know that once we make this decision, we will lose all plans to remedy it. If we don't cut off all means of retreat, how can we win? We have missed 6 eras. History has already proven everything. This time, we must believe in Martha's judgment. Then, why can't we let him replace that girl? We still have a chance, but this time, we are not the ones who make the decision. According to the rules of the meeting, arbiters, please withdraw from the voting. The silver-robed men nodded and left their seats. They turned around and walked out of the round hole. The light suddenly became bright, as if it had swallowed everyone in the hole. Brando suddenly jolted back to reality. He realized that it was Alaz who had lit up the magic lamp, and the bright light once again lit up the entire laboratory. At this time, Huang Hua finally noticed the heavy expression on her teacher's face. She could not help but ask softly, "Teacher." "I'm fine, Huang Hua." Brando raised his head and looked at Princess Magadal apologetically. The latter's face was still a little pale. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. "Mr. Brando, Magadal shook her head gently. "I still can't remember much about the past. I can't remember who attacked me." "It's okay." Brando sighed. "Then don't think too much about it." He looked forward, and his gaze fell on the other side of the exit. "Let's move on. Akentu and the rest should have passed through here and are heading towards the core area of the laboratory." Brando's gaze fell on the center of the hall, where there were obvious traces of a battle. Alaz looked at the stained golden blood on the ground anxiously. The dragon race's sense of smell was very sensitive, and she could even distinguish the scent of Faropa from the blood. Faropa was injured, and this discovery made her very nervous. She could not help but think of the corpses she saw on the way, and was afraid that she would see Faropa's corpse next. However, she also knew that this wasn't the time for her to be willful. Putting everything else aside, the power of their opponent, the Lord of the Purgatory, Akentu, wasn't something that any of them could match. If they weren't careful, not to mention her and Fu Luo, even everyone present might be buried here forever. Brando finally saw the little female dragon's anxiety. Without saying a word, he led everyone through the laboratory and continued to move towards the core area. However, they had only taken 2 steps when they stopped. Because in the corridor behind the laboratory, they found a person covered in blood sitting against the wall. The other party's appearance was that of a human male, about 40 years old. He hung his head lifelessly, like a corpse. But Brando knew that the other party was a giant dragon. He only needed to look at the golden blood flowing out of the wounds all over his body to understand. Garek. Alaz recognized her familiar companion for the first time. She subconsciously took a step forward, but suddenly thought of something and gritted her teeth and stopped. However, as if it had heard the little female dragon's low cry, the blood-covered dragon actually swayed slightly and raised its head with some difficulty. His movement caused chaos. Lotus almost screamed and hid behind Miss Magadal, and Phoenix Fire also put on a defensive posture. Mr. Liu and Fong Chi both unsheathed their swords. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.